All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for joining us today. This is the Santa Clara County Finance and Government Operations Committee, and we have a number of items on the agenda, and the first order of business, of course, is the call to order to establish a quorum. So I'm going to ask the clerk to please call the roll and see if we can establish a quorum.
Supervisor Chavez. Here. Supervisor Simitian.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Both members of the committee being present and accounted for, we have established a quorum. Next item is public comment. Do we have any folks who are here to speak under public comment? Public comment is that portion of our agenda set aside for comment by members of the public on non-agendized items not on our agenda, but that are properly within the jurisdiction of our board. I have one card, I believe, from Susan Bassey, and I have a card from Mr. Largent, who's asking if he can do his public comment a little bit later. And I'm fine with that. If you're agreeable, Supervisor Chavez, we'll just wait until there's a break. Yes, sir. Do I have a card from you as well?
I have one for 11. Could that be changed to general comment?
Okay, we will take that item up either as item number 11, or if it's suggested for consent, we'll take it up when we do the consent calendar. But I will not forget you. And if I do forget you, just stand up just like you're doing.
Give it under general now.
I'm going to ask you to wait until your item comes up, please. This is for non-agendized items only. And I have yet another card. So, Ms. Bassey, why don't you come on forward? And as you know, we have 3 minutes set aside for speakers under public comment.
Good morning. My name is Susan Bassey, and I've appeared since November 14th, 2017, before various committees with the county and the Board of Supervisors. This morning, I was preparing a response to the whistleblower report that you're going to receive on item number 11, and I have contained in that response some information that needs to be public knowledge. As I was leaving, one of my favorite legal secretaries said to me, every time I turn on the news, there are more bad guys. And the problem that we have is that the bad guys don't only exist in Washington. We have recently watched national headlines as Michael Cohen was exposed for the lawyer that he was and what he was doing that influenced our elections. We have just as many dirty government and private lawyers in this county. We have been complicit, indifferent, and incompetent in investigating those lawyers. Jeff Rosen's office was investigated by the Attorney General for giving his staff overtime pay and things that he should not have been doing as a newly elected district attorney. We gave him a slap on the hand, we told him to repay it, and then everybody went on their merry way. It is unlikely that a newly elected district attorney who came into our county riding in on public corruption has stopped what he was doing. In my whistleblower response report, I will lay out several issues of what Jeff Rosen has done in this county during his tenure. He has maliciously prosecuted people that have had to spend millions of dollars to defend themselves and ultimately retained factual findings of innocence. That means it never happened. That means it cost our county a lot of money, but it cost our private citizens even more. Mr. Rosen has used his position to prosecute people for his own political aspirations, and this county has done nothing to supervise it. Mr. Simitian, I watched recently an elderly woman come to you during public comment. Her name was Emma May, and she tried to complain about things that were being done in our courts. And you specifically said to her that this board and all the committees has no jurisdiction over the courts. That is wrong, and that was a lie, because you do have jurisdiction. You have jurisdiction under public corruption investigation. You have a DA who has a unit for public corruption, and you are charged to be able to take things to the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, or the FBI when it smells rotten, when it's public corruption, when our citizens are being robbed. The Center of Investigative Reporting is starting a new local lab here. The media is coming back. You guys have been able to bury your secrets while the media has been away. And I want to let you know we're back and the secrets aren't going to be buried. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Pamela Nuttleman. Please come forward.
The name is Noodleman.
Forgive my pronunciation.
Pamela Noodleman. I was the former wife of a former prosecutor in this county. I know very well the culture and the distinctions within our local legal system. After I made several comments here, I was referred by you, Mr. Smidian, to the county counsel's office, and then I was directed to the whistleblowers program. I worked with them to provide them with documents and names of victims of Brad Baugh and other divorce attorneys in this county who are greatly harming families and breaking the law. I was told the county would bring the FBI, the Department of Justice, and others into the investigation, but they have done nothing thus far. This county consistently fails to prosecute and investigate lawyers and others who are breaking the law. The publicly funded whistleblower program should be held responsible, should be held accountable to protect the public and report public corruption as it advertises its purpose as a public ally. I would like to hear a response, Mr. Smidian.
As I think we've shared previously, on non-agendized items, not appropriate for our board to engage in significant comment and certainly not action. And in general, even on agendized items, the public comment opportunity is an opportunity for people to comment, but not to engage in dialogue. So your time has been stopped so that the time I've been speaking hasn't counted against you, but I would certainly invite you to go ahead and finish your comments if you'd like to.
Well, if you can't reply to me publicly, perhaps you can set an appointment and speak with me and give me an explanation in private. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Scott Largent, if Mr. Largent is here. And if he's not, I'm going to, Supervisor Chavez, simply hold his card out, and when we have a break between items, we'll return to public comment. So with that understanding, we will go on to item number 3, which is to approve the consent calendar and any changes to the committee's agenda. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this process, after a review by members of the board, excuse me, members of the committee, forgive me, we take a look at what may already be suitable for consent. Doesn't necessarily mean the items are insignificant or unimportant, just means we may not have any comments or questions. And obviously, if we have folks who want to speak to those items, it's important that we know that as well. I am looking at the list I've made, Supervisor Chavez, and I think that items number 6, Office of Sustainability Report, item number 12, the Finance Agency on the county travel policy, item 13, SSA Public Guardian, item 14, Public Guardian, item 16, Corporate Sponsorships, and then items 17, 18, and 19 might all be possible candidates for consent. Obviously, if you'd like to keep any of those on the regular agenda, happy to do so. Let me begin by asking if you're okay with those items staying on consent, or if there are any you'd like to make sure we discuss today.
I would like to make a request for information on item 6, and maybe I can just do that real quickly, and you can see if that requires it to be pulled off. And what I would like to do is get an off-agenda report to determine whether or not we, ESA, eliminated an OOS position for the climate, for that climate work. And if they did that, did the board take action on it? If they didn't do that, if the board didn't take action on it, then I would want an off-agenda explanation for it.
Okay. So in a moment, what I'm going to do, Supervisor, if you're comfortable with all of those items, including item 6, along with your request for an off-agenda report remaining on the consent calendar, I'll ask for a motion to approve items 6, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19 with a request for a report back on that. And then you had a couple that you thought you might like to add?
Yes. What I thought we could add is item 20 and 21. And my interest in that is that it appears that some of the meatier discussion we need to have isn't isn't in those items. It looked like it may be in item 23.
I'm going to ask that we keep those items on the agenda
Okay.
just to give us a little flexibility, if I could.
No
It's not that
problem.
I have a different view as much as I want to keep some flexibility there.
I understand, and it's probably the same staff. And then, under item 9 is the actionable significant reforms for improving the hiring process. And under item 9, these are, it doesn't really respond to those top 3 actionable items referred to, that I requested. But it does appear that that staff report looks like it came on the board agenda versus this agenda. And so what I wanted to recommend was, instead of pulling this off today, given that I think that they're just in a kind of a constant state of reporting out, that we have a report back on this item that's responsive both to the requests made by the board at the board meeting and also our board in 3 months rather than 6 months.
So the chair would gratefully entertain a motion to approve items 6, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19 on consent with a request for an off-agenda report back on item 6 as indicated in your earlier remarks, and what I will call a continuance of item number 9 for a 3-month period with a request that when that item comes back to the board, it be more narrowly crafted to address the request for 3 specific action items.
Yes, and in concurrence with the information that was requested by the board and by you.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Do I have such a motion, Supervisor?
moved.
All right, I have a motion by Supervisor Chavez to that effect. I want to make sure, I don't think we have any speaker cards on any of the proposed consent calendar items. And let me just see, are there any members of staff who, in all seriousness, feel that they would like to present on any of those items, or that there are issues that need to be raised that haven't been addressed in the staff reports? If not,
Yeah,
Supervisor Chavez?
Actually, I might be able to add one more, and that's our Office of Immigrant Relations has their annual report, but they're bringing an item to us at the full board that's going to address.
I've got just 1 or 2 quick questions there, and I would like to let them report
Okay.
briefly.
That'd
Thank
be
you.
fine.
All right. Motion on the floor, second by Simidian. Without objection, hearing none, unanimously approved. Thank you all very much. So again, if you are here for items 6, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, or 19, those items have just been dispensed with. That takes us back to our regular place on the agenda with the next item, which is item number 4, which is to receive the report from the County Communications Department relating to the performance of the new 911 telephone system. Let me ask who's going to come forward and present on this item, and if you'd introduce yourself to the committee, even if we know your name and title, and make sure that members of the public, as well as anyone who is watching, knows who you are as well, please. And you do have to make those microphones work.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Simidian, Supervisor Chavez, staff. I'm Tony Bowden, Fire Chief, Santa Clara County Fire Department, and briefly introduce our brand new Director of Communications. To my right, Heather Plamondon.
Would you repeat the name and the title?
Director of County Communications, Heather Plamondon.
Thank you.
And Deputy Chief right to my right, Suwana Kurd-Cow, also Interim Deputy Director of County Communications.
Thank you so much. Who's going to present?
I'm going to have Deputy Chief Kurd-Cow present. She's been instrumental in the dispatch center for the last 6 months.
All right, Deputy Chief, go to it.
Good
A
afternoon.
little bit of irony that the comms person is struggling with our comms system there. I can't help point that out. Good. They're challenging. Go to
All
it.
right. As requested in the December FGOC, report out for the new telephone system that was implemented in November 29th of 2017 is being presented to you. So we reviewed the data for call answering time up and through the end of June of this year, and we have an improvement over the previous year, which was roughly around 84% of the time we answered the call in under 15 seconds. The data from November 29th through the end of June of this year shows that we are answering the calls roughly just under 98% of the time in under 15 seconds. And the state standard that is the objective is to answer the call in under 15 seconds, 95% of the time. With that said, we are also in alignment with being able to implement the text to 911 technology, which will be we plan on implementing and having be able to respond back to texters by June of this year. Excuse me, I'm sorry, December of this year. We are not able, because of our current CAD system, to be able to receive multimedia text messages, just just SMS text. But that would be in line with the next gen CAD, which we are currently in the procurement process for. I'm happy to answer any questions regarding the phone system.
Thank you very much. I do not believe we have speaker cards on this item. Supervisor Chavez, comments or questions?
So first of all, welcome, Heather, and to our interim chief. What's your actual title?
I'm Deputy Chief and Interim Deputy Director at County Communications.
Yeah, put that on a card. So anyway, thank you for your really good work. And Tony, I know you really led the way here. So I think the numbers are just going in the right direction, and congratulations on that. I also really appreciate the changes you're trying to make for the employees. Just the level of stress in those environments is incredible, and really not having a healthy ways to get rid of that stress is probably a reason that we lose so many people. So I'm hoping that not only are we doing the right thing relative to just making sure that people who work for us are properly supported and cared for, but I also am really interested in looking longitudinally at whether or not we're able to keep people longer and in a healthier way in that environment. So I'm hoping that you're going to figure out a way to do at least maybe working with the ESA to figure out what are some good benchmarks that we could use to determine how the changes you've made in the department really do impact how long people stay with us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The wellness program that we're developing at County Communications is in alignment with County Fire's Healthy In and Healthy Out initiative, which is you're healthy when you come in and we want you healthy when you go home. To that end, in the last 6 months, Chief Kurtkow has been instrumental in installing 2 quiet rooms, one being a critical incident stress room, and a new gym, as studies have shown that vigorous exercise right after a critical event is very helpful moving forward. So we will be building on that program, and look forward to providing more information in the future.
That'd be great. And I think particularly as it relates to the next phase of the RFP, because if in fact we're able to integrate in video and other kinds of live event connections, that it appears to me that for some that will have a positive impact and for others maybe not. I do know from anecdotally from talking to dispatchers, sometimes the thing that makes them feel the worst is that they're not at the site. They've got a very specific piece of the event, and then there's no follow-up. They can't talk to anybody, and so. But I also recognize that seeing a live video of some of the trauma that's happening will have an effect on them as well. So part of the reason I'm so interested in these wellness programs being up in time for that is I think it will help us be ready for what that next generation of information really looks like for the folks that are answering calls. Which brings me to my last question, and that is, in the current RFP, is the RFP out already?
Yes, the RFP is out. It's closed, and it's currently being reviewed by the evaluation committee.
I will then not make the comments I was going to make about the current RFP, except to say I'm very excited that you're really looking into multimedia, because I think we just really don't have a choice but to be in that environment. So thank you, and thank you for your good work.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
I'll add my thanks and congratulations before you step away, folks.
Sorry.
Almost got away clean.
I was going to see, did you notice? Yeah.
The the 97.99% number, obviously a dramatic improvement, obviously appreciably better than the minimum state standard. Is that in your, and let me just be clear, I'm asking because I want to know and I want to understand what we can do to help you get the best possible result. I'm not asking because 6 months from now I'm going to wag my finger at you if you haven't got the same number or you got. But I am trying to ask myself, is that a sustainable number?
Yes, it is a sustainable number, and a lot of that is because, again, the upgrade of the phone system, but the dispatchers are not having to do a motor skill to actually answer the call. The call comes into their ear automatically, and they have all been trained and are now, and they themselves possess the muscle memory to be at the ready at all times and know that they'll hear the call come in and they answer the call immediately.
And I'm always reminded by my constituents and the folks that we all serve that, that's great for the 97.99, let's call it 98% of the folks who get that prompt response. But of course, that means there's 2% out there who are not getting quite as prompt a response. And of course, to them, that's 100% of their emergency. So is it possible that we can make even more progress? And if so, what might that entail?
I'll be happy to answer that.
Because given the volume of calls you get, it's not an inconsequential number, actually.
It's not. And, the last data set that we pulled from last November till now, it's 37, almost 38,000 calls. So it is quite a bit of calls. One of the things that we're working on.
Chief, if you can just pull the microphone up, I think that'll help.
Sure. One of the things that we're working on that we think will help with sustaining this number and also increasing it is creation of a dedicated call taker position. We've been working closely with ESA on our job spec revisions that will have dedicated call takers, so that's our sole focus instead of splitting time between dispatching units and answering 911 calls.
Good. And that's on track, understanding that these things always take longer than we hope. It's on track to happen, yes?
Correct. We've already had meetings with ESA, and we have meetings in the future scheduled, so we are on track to make this happen.
And could you tell us just a little bit more about what you think the potential is for text message? I mean, obviously the media changes, the communication systems change. Is this going to be how significant an enhancement will it be in terms of practical operations and utility? I mean, I'm glad we're doing it. I'm just trying to get a sense whether or not this is going to be negligible, significant, modest, some characterization.
Yeah, we've done some research and reached out to several other dispatch centers that currently take text to 911 calls. And for them, the data is showing that they're not getting a lot of text messages. And in fact, they're utilizing their text message calls for more complicated calls in the way that we do for TDY, which is if you can call, can you pick up the phone and call? Because it just facilitates getting the information a little faster. For one of the call centers, they only get an EMS call once a month. So as of right now, until potentially a push with the public, and even with the push for the public, it's going to be call if you can, text if you can't, because the preferred method to get information that is timely and accurate is really through voice conversation.
Yeah. Let me offer a couple of thoughts, but first underscoring I have no professional expertise whatsoever in this subject. But as a layperson and as a policymaker, the times that I have been mindful of the potential utility of text is obviously when there's an active shooter that is in a situation where people don't feel they can call because that would reveal their presence and their location. And so theoretically, somebody in that situation could text in a way that would keep them safe and still allow them to communicate the nature of the emergency. I was pleased to hear you say, the outreach to the public, because I think, particularly, almost everyone of any age, but particularly for, folks who are middle-aged and older, call 911 has been the message for as long as anyone can remember. And I think call if you can, text if you must is a complicated message to break through on. It just is. And unfortunately, it's a complicated message. But I do want to encourage you to be thinking about, and perhaps share with us the next time you're in front of us, the public outreach component of this, because I think for text to be at all useful to you or meaningfully useful to you, I think there's a major public education effort that's probably going to have to take place. And again, I say all this with no data, just sort of a seat of the pants layman's perspective. Fortunately, I've only had to call 911, a couple of times in my life. But I think I'll be curious to see how the use of the new technology develops. And I think in those times and places where it is essential, we want people to know how to do it. Thank you again for the progress. And
Joe,
you
may
could-
I follow up?
please.
Sorry, you were just about to get away, but that actually prompted another just kind of question. So I think the point that is raised is really right, and I also think that making sure that as we move forward, we have a basic platform that allows us to plug in what the new thing is really going to be of high priority. Pardon me. That being said, how does sometimes our calls don't work, but our text does? Is that, pardon me, is that going to be impacted by this whole discussion around net neutrality and throttling and all that?
It seems I can't get away from that this week.
Well, you're about to get more, so stay tuned.
When you're talking, you're right, Supervisor Chavez. When phone lines are impacted, sometimes SMS text messages can come in. So I do see that as being a benefit. I think one of the most immediate benefits is going to be to our hearing impaired community, to allow access to the 911 center. That's what we anticipate being one of the biggest users. But as far as in an emergency where you can get through on a text, that this could be a means to get to the 911 call center when you otherwise couldn't.
I mean, part of what made me think a little bit about it is that earthquakes, fires, and also where you just have a lot of people clogging up the system at the same time. It seems like that would almost be a natural. The other thing I don't know the answer to is, what's the average age of someone who dials 911? Do we know?
I actually don't have that number.
Because what we're saying on, and this would just be a recommendation that might be worth taking a look at, is the hotlines that are being used right now for domestic violence and human trafficking. Interestingly, we were using a phone number for human trafficking. The text has been much more, many more people have reached out via text than phone calls. Now, that may be because those aren't, those are urgent issues but not emergent. I don't know the answer to that, but it might be a value as you're evaluating this, because the YWCA and Nextdoor are working on, I think, merging their call-in numbers. And a lot of the information, a lot of people who are reaching out to them, it appears to me, are using text messaging. So, but thank you.
And before you step away, inadvertently, I meant to mention, I haven't had a chance to talk to Dr. Smith yet, but I have had a chance to talk to our county council briefly. I know this subject of the throttling incidents has gotten generated some interest, let's put it that way. Supervisor Chavez, my plan is to schedule a special meeting of FGOC, this committee, sometime in the fall, soon, September, October, to have a thorough hearing about the incident or incidents with an eye toward understanding what the larger implications are. I'm not so much interested in, rehashing or chastising based on what happened. I just, going forward, want to make sure that we understand what the implications are for our organization, for others who do similar work, and that is, of course, a great many organizations and men and women, and then also, frankly, as part of the larger conversation at the national level about what the policy ought to be in this area. I think understanding what the implications of what has been described as a throttling episode are for public safety is something we can't afford to just glide by. So on that one, let's just call it to be continued, okay?
And on that, I'm really excited you're doing that. And one thing that would be, I think would be
I'm glad because we're going to be doing it, so.
Oh, that's right. As I just said, that'll be so fun.
Yeah.
But one of the other issues that I would love to have council weigh in on is, as we think about these issues, is whether or not we need to restructure contracts that we have with entities like Verizon, like any of them, because if the federal government isn't going to do their job, we may have to do it contractually. So I'm interested in understanding that. I'm also interested in understanding what the implications are for our current contract with Verizon.
Understood. Thank you all. I think we're really going to let you step away now. And we have a motion from Supervisor Chavez, I believe, to receive the report. And I'll offer a second. And there are no speakers. And without objection, approved. So item number 4 has been dispensed with. That takes us to item number 5, which is to receive a report from the Office of the County Executive relating to countywide contracting. And I see county staff stepping down. Dr. Smith, who's going to present on this item?
Miriam Singer, who's our Chief Procurement Officer, will present.
All right, Ms. Singer, welcome. And if you just introduce yourself, even though we know who you are, tell us your name and your title, please. It will work best if the microphone is live and up in front of your face. There we go.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Miriam Singer, Chief Procurement Officer. Good afternoon, President Simidian, Supervisor Chavez, and Ms. Solov. We're delighted to introduce Mr. Andrew Zavoyski, who is our new Director of the Office of Countywide Contracting Management. With us today also is our analyst, MJ Fogelstrom. We have provided a report that depicts the progress to date in areas of competition, policy compliance, and opportunity for enhancement of our procurement function on a countywide basis. We'd be happy to address any questions and suggestions that the board may have.
I'm guessing we both have some. Supervisor Chavez? Either way? All right. I'm looking, thank you for the report. Thank you for the work to make progress, more importantly. On packet page 11, I note it says that a 2017 analysis of all county contracts for goods and services revealed that close to 60% were identified as non-competitive. Clearly, this figure is far too high, and it is important that we work strategically to increase the number of competitive procurements, end quote. Thank you for the observation. Agree with the observation. First question is there an industry standard, for lack of a better way of saying what percentage it is? I don't want you to pick an arbitrary number out of the air, but you know, if you were to say, oh, we're at such and such a percentage, that seems about the norm. Is there such a number, or would that just be random and arbitrary?
President Simidian, it is difficult to compare ourselves to other jurisdictions because we also run a public hospital, and there are certain unique services and goods that are required that are not procured through competitive means and not available through competitive methods. But I would say 20-80 split is a reasonable split in terms of 80% of our contracts being competitive and 20% being unique, single or sole source based on the operational needs and the availability in the marketplace.
And thank you, that's helpful, because I was trying to get a rough order of magnitude.
That is rough.
So if it was 75-25, you wouldn't say, oh my God, I'm shocked, there's a problem here. And if it was 15% to 85%, you wouldn't say, gee, that's odd. You'd say, sort of in the ballpark.
Correct.
Okay. Full disclosure, like most people, I think I want to have it both ways. I think there's actually a book out now called All Ways is the Only Way I Want to Have It. But I have actually, since I first came on the board 5.5 years ago, been pushing for some of this kind of contracting reform, so I'm pleased to see it. I welcome it. On the other hand, as you've no doubt already observed during your tenure here, there are circumstances in individual supervisors' districts, particularly working with community-based groups that have special relationship in the district, and of course they all argue they have a special relationship in the district, where you're trying to partner with someone rather than go through a contracting process that would be appropriate and helpful for ordering 1 million widgets at the lowest responsible bidder's price. Get any thoughts about that based on what you've seen?
Absolutely. There are some unique services that only our county provides that there are other jurisdictions that haven't even given thought to in terms of creativity, in terms of service to individuals in our community in need. And so there are some unique services that are provided only by some community-based or social service delivery organizations, and that's understandable. But where there are opportunities for more than one service provider to offer a unique service, then that gives us the path to competition. So there will be those instances where, of course, there will be community-based organizations that offer a unique service that's not replicated by others, and those would be flowing through a single or sole source approval.
Could you remind us what the process is for review and approval of something as a single or a sole source? And remind at least me of every time I think I have single and sole source separated, I end up reversing them. So a single source contract is one, I believe, where there's only one provider, or did I get it 180% wrong again? If you can tell me.
The other way around.
So I got it exactly right, only exactly wrong. Okay, so if we flipped it around, so a single source is where, how would you describe it?
A single source is where there is a best interest case, where there are other sources of supply, but there's a best interest case in the interest of the county and the community we serve, where we would contract with one provider, although there are more than one providers in the space that provide a like service or provide a like good.
Sole source is, look, folks, there really is only one entity prepared to provide this service or product, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so back to single source. Who makes that case and to whom, and who reviews it?
The original case is made by the client department, and the submission of the business case and market research to support that business case is submitted to OCCM, our Office of Countywide Contract Management, and working with the procurement department. There is research to validate or support or to identify other sources of supply, and it is a collaborative decision that involves communication between centralized OCCM, the procurement department, and the client department that is seeking to forgo competition for a certain good or service.
So we might say, look, there are 3 community-based organizations that could provide such a service, so that means they can't be a sole source because there are 3 that could provide the service. But someone might be saying, but you know, based on the last 20 years of history, one of these 3 really is clearly better positioned to provide the caliber and type of service among those 3 community-based nonprofits, and then it's up to the advocate to make the case. Am I processing this more or less right?
Yes, and there would be research that would be used as a basis to have that conversation, and questions asked of the 3 potential providers in terms of their experience, their know-how, their track record in providing that unique service.
Got it. And let me turn just to clarify a little bit on the answer that you provided to Dr. Smith. So when we get a single source contract before us as a board, and it has been recommended or approved as to single source, that means that somebody had to make the final call before it came to us, in spite of this numerous input. Who is that person?
Well,
Persons.
it goes through a number of discussions. First of all, the department makes the argument to OCCM. OCCM either, like Miriam says, collects data, does an analysis, talks to the department. They will approve it or disapprove it. Miriam is involved in that decision. If that happens, then it gets forwarded on to the Agenda Review Committee, at which point myself, County Counsel, and Chief Operating Officer Miguel Marquez all review it. We usually push back on it, but if we all agree, then it gets put on the agenda and recommended. So ultimately, it's the county executive that makes the final decision about whether it should go before the board.
Okay. One of the other things I noted, thank you, packet page 15, there's again, I'm quoting directly, and actually I think now I'm on packet page 16, 3rd paragraph. It is important to note, this is a quote, it is important to note that cost and or timing associated with a competitive bidding process are not considered as a basis for waiving competition. Now, I'm going to put that in even more colloquial terms. I read that as you trying to remind us that when someone says to you, gee, that's hard, or it's going to take me some time, or that's an annoying thing to have to do, you're reminding us that that's not a, quote, basis for waiving competition. Is that a fair, albeit layman's summary of what you're trying to communicate there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me ask, we're at 60%, which, based on your sort of rough ballpark, is like 2 or 3 times the number that you would hope for. How much of that is attributable to the gee, it takes time? How much of it is actually attributable to the fact that there's a cost involved? I'm trying to get a sense for, is this just that folks are failing to plan and we're doing things last minute? Is it that the procurement process is too time consuming? What's going on there when we hear from people? And I see Dr. Smith weighing in, so he may want to step into the conversation. But what's going on when people say that? Is it...
Well, Miriam will give her impression, but from looking at a sample of the contracts, a lot of them have to do with health and hospital contracts, which we've entered into long ago, and so, you know, there's no competitive process because we already have that technology, and therefore, you know, we can't really change it. A fair amount of them, a significant amount of them go to CBOs that we've been working with for many years, and, you know, have a long-term history. And so even though we do RFPs for most of the CBO contracts, there's always a few that are awarded because of the special services. And then some of them have to do with IT, TSS, where again, technology is the same. There are also some consultant contracts where we've had the same consultant before, brought them back for numerous times. So those tend to be the most common situation. In my experience, Miriam might correct me if I'm wrong, but we definitely think that we can do better. And the reason we've discovered this really has to do with our effort in the last 3 years to centralize contract monitoring more clearly and creating the Office of Central Contract Monitoring, so that you know, we've discovered that a lot of the, quote, decentralized contracts didn't have a really good reason for single or sole source, which is why Miriam's on them right now.
Okay. Ms. Singer, anything else? Again, I'm trying to get a little sense for, you know, when people push back a little or just say, gee, this is going to, you know, take time or cost us, you know, what's driving that?
So I think Dr. Smith covered it very nicely and fairly on the dot. There is a cultural change underway, and it is significant because we are taking a look and doing our diligence before we are moving forward to approve single and sole sources. So there may be instances where folks perhaps received a grant with a very short time frame, and we accommodate those instances because they're reasonable and we don't want to lose the money. We want the service out there in the community. But it is a hodgepodge, but there is a driver that is the social service and human service and medical service driver, which in and of itself includes quite a bit of uniqueness. And so that is part of that 60%. And we recognize that, and if there is not availability, then we don't take as much time with that and move it forward. It is only in those instances where market research shows that there's availability by other sources where we see better value through competition.
Thank you. You mentioned the culture change, and I want to move to that. There, in the report, there was indication, I know there were talk about classes and training and so on, but part of the change management effort, as I understand it, is to provide customized plans for ensuring that affected employees have the awareness and the coaching and the leadership, frankly, to make the change. We've talked, Dr. Smith, a little bit about how long that's going to take. I think the conversation was 3 to 5 years. Is that still, I mean, on the one hand, you think, oh my gosh, 3 to 5 years just to change our contracting processes. On the other hand, I think all of us have experienced just how long it takes to change a organizational culture. So, thoughts?
Well, I think the processes and policies are much more quickly dealt with than that. I expect, 6 to 9 months to be complete, but in order to train everybody, yes, it'll be 3 to 5 years. As we pulled apart the process and realized that in the decentralized contracting, that there were literally hundreds of staff who had some involvement in some contracts, and a lot of them only had 1 or 2 a year. We found lots of inconsistency based on the fact that either that particular person wasn't familiar with the process, or they didn't remember last time they did it, or they felt under a lot of pressure to get it done quick. So when we created the OCCM, a lot of that was revealed. And so now what Miriam's doing is trying to, shall we say, eliminate the situations where 1 or 2 people are involved in 1 or 2 contracts a year and become more centrally led. So at that level, that band will take some significant training over a number of years. But the central level is intact, and the close decentralized group will be faster. And those are the departments that do a lot of contracts like SSA, Health and Hospital, and IT. Blink.
I thought you were going to say the energy department. That's an inside joke, by the way. Ms. Singer, if I could ask, when I arrived, I think you've been here since January, if I remember correctly?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. When I arrived in January of 2013, or returned in 2013, my impression, and that's, all it could be in my first month back, was that on these contract issues, there was a sort of a culture of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Meaning, hey, we've used this vendor for 5 years, life goes on. Why would we take the time and the expense to go out and look for a new vendor when things are going perfectly well? And I think part of the answer to that is because we're a public agency and we need to be able to assure the public that they're getting value for their tax dollars. I also think part of the answer to that question is because if you don't go out and rebid it, you don't know if it's broken or not because you've been using the same vendor for 5 years and you've sort of come to think that's the way life is. But you get any thoughts about that part of you get a different experience, same experience, other experiences? I'm just trying to sort of get a sense for what the organizational culture has been around not going out and contracting competitively again.
In some measure, the areas that you shared are on point. In addition to that, there is the opportunity for greater value. Just in a few months, with very light guidance, even before we implemented the training program that is described in the report, light guidance with negotiations on dollar value issues alone, the team was able to negotiate $10 million in savings plus. And that doesn't even capture the enhancements, the actual enhancements in each contract. That's just the dollars. And so the value proposition is very, very significant, and that's where our opportunity is, because if we are able to avoid expending funds through a strategic negotiated process that includes taking on areas where competition is a possibility but not yet a reality for us, we can serve more people and do more innovative things, even unique things, to serve our community and to help folks out. So that is the real value proposition in all of this. Yes, we are government, and it's the right thing to do. It's the legal thing to do. It's a fair thing to do. But the bottom line is we can serve more people, and there is great need in our community. So,
got it. 2 more questions, and then I'm going to turn to Supervisor Chavez. didn't see a lot here, if anything, about Ariba.
So we will be providing an update on our Ariba solution
That'll
in
teach
our
me to
next
ask.
report.
Okay. I said that'll teach me to ask. Go right ahead, sorry.
And so our team is taking a deep dive into the current available technology solutions, not only the Ariba solution, but the PMM solution and others that are available to us. On parallel, we are mapping our current process to look forward to some process enhancements and improvements. So we hope to give you a detailed report in the future.
Was that a tactful way of saying that maybe Ariba hasn't quite lived up to our hopes and expectations?
Maybe I'll jump in here. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
There were a number of promises made that didn't actually come to fruition or couldn't come to fruition. And so we had significant disappointment with that. And the implementation has been quite limited. So Miriam's being kind, but I think Ariba will be placed in a very limited part of our process.
Okay. Well, I was going to say I look forward to getting that report, but it sounds like I don't.
No, you don't.
Last question, and then I want to give Supervisor Chavez the microphone. Packet page 12, it looks like you're focusing some significant time and attention and effort on increasing the number of vendors, presumably, again, to increase the competition so that we get value for money, as some folks say. And that the goal is a 50% increase. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, sir.
And we're at a 29% increase in the vendor base just in the last 4 months?
I think we're almost up to 40% at this point in terms of the increase.
So first, congratulations. That sounds like a great idea. It sounds like that's pretty fast progress. I mean, I understand they haven't all, made their way into providing services, that this is a question of just who's in the vendor base. But were you surprised that it was, quote, that easy to push the number up?
Yes. Actually, we just opened the doors and did some outreach, worked with VTA, but also relied greatly on our in-house team to go out through social media and to open the doors every Wednesday of our offices and welcome vendors and work with them. Now, the next piece is strategic in nature, because what we'd like to do is identify vendors that actually provide the unique commodities and services that we purchase so that we can amplify the vendor base in those areas in addition to just opening the doors. So this is what was done, and this is our low-hanging fruit, if you will, that we've been able to secure, but there's much to be done, and the team is working on some innovative ways, some with social media, as I mentioned, but also in-person meetings and vendor outreach in all the areas of our community so that we're known and so that the message is out there that we're inviting competition. We have a vendor survey out on our webpage. We have a client survey. I think Supervisor Chavez mentioned that during our budget deliberations. And so we'd like to get baseline data in terms of feedback so that can be a launching point for improvement.
Do you have a sense for why these vendors or potential vendors remained untapped? Was it that they literally didn't know there was a county government, which I encounter from time to time with people I talk to, or was it that they found us daunting or a bit of a black box? Well, why don't I let you answer the question? So
there are a number of possible reasons. One might be that for many years we have contracted with single vendors in certain areas where there might have been competition. Another area of opportunity is to enhance our technology tools and make them more nimble and easy to navigate. And some of it is just getting the information out and having the resources deployed in that space so that they can reach the vendors.
Again, you were very tactful, particularly as to the first item. My translation is that there were perhaps some vendors who thought that somebody essentially had a contract that, was going to be there more or less forever, and why bother to compete? Did I hear that right?
I mean, I wouldn't use those words, but I would say that there's always opportunity to take a look at requirements to make sure they're open and competitive. There's always an opportunity to lend a voice out to the community, to invite vendors in and make our process more nimble to navigate, and we're working on that. We're working on our process flows. We're working on our interactions with our client departments. We're working closely with County Council to improve on our policy recommendations and internal administrative guidelines and documents for more consistency throughout. And those are things that feed the vendor a positive vendor experience. If a vendor has to go to every department and navigate a different process, it becomes cumbersome, and then they have to be pretty strategic in terms of where they're going to invest their time and resources, because it does cost money to compete. So these are all factors. I don't know that one outweighs the other. It's a combination of factors, and I don't think our county is unique in that way. I think all government agencies struggle with attracting more vendors and being more competitive, getting the best possible value for their tax dollars.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez, thank you for your patience with my many questions. Go to it.
Thank you. I'd like to start with Ariba. And just say one thing about Ariba, and if my issue can't be resolved through Ariba, I'm interested in understanding where it can be resolved. My belief has been that often people don't apply for contracts with the county because they don't know enough about the county operations. They don't think about all the things we buy. And I know this because I've gone to some of the outreach meetings, and I say, look, we buy paper clips, we buy pencils, we buy diapers, we buy cars. These are all the things that we do. And inevitably, someone's been talked into a meeting who comes forward and said, I never thought about you all as an opportunity for me. So I had hoped that Ariba would be so transparent as to allow someone in the community who sells, brokers, X, Y, or Z, to be able to go online and say, when is their printing contract up? When the contract's length is this long, here's the kind of work they do. I should think about bidding, and I can plan years in advance potentially how I'm going to organize my business and where I'm going to think about growing, and whether or not the County of Santa Clara is a partner for them. So irrespective of what our next steps are, my objective really is to be as transparent as we can be with vendors, but also the public, about how we spend money, who we're doing work with, and why. Is that enormously tied to Ariba, or is there another way to get there?
Supervisor Chavez, that is not tied to Ariba, but yes, there are other ways to get there. In fact, we just launched our up-to-date, new and improved webpage, and one of the links that will go live shortly is a list of all of our active contracts that include expiration dates. In addition, for non-competitive procurements, we will be posting the scopes and the statements of work and requirements so that we might draw interest from other providers, other vendors, so that we can amplify competition in those areas where competition is limited. So I believe that our webpage and its development, current and future, will allow for the functionality that you speak of.
And what's the timeline on that?
The timeline for that would be within the next 4 to 6 months. Much of the groundwork has been accomplished, and it's a matter of fine-tuning and testing some of the functionality to ensure that it works, and again, that it's easy to navigate for folks in the community.
So coupled with that, the other reason I had such a fascination, besides how we could be connected with the community with your work, is that it also appeared to me for a very long time, and I just want to comment the point that Joe raised about when we have a sole or a single source or an evergreen contract. And one of the issues I'd really be interested in seeing addressed is under what terms and conditions and how do we frame and address evergreen contracts? Because in some instances, there may be a lot of value to having these more meaningful long-term relationships, but the inability and the expectation of both parties that those contracts be refreshed and or that changes in the way the county wants to do business should be a core component of the relationship are just lost on people that we talk to when they say, oh, no, we have a 50-year contract with you, or we're the only ones who can provide X service. And I have to say, for the most part, that's pretty rare. That's pretty rarely true. And I think we're a big enough community that that's pretty rare. So in any case, I also wonder if you've been thinking about how those contracts get refreshed, and if that's part of the training that you're already doing, and is there a best practice that you've already incorporated in your training?
Sure, I'd be happy to address that. So as you mentioned, there are very few and far between evergreen contracts. When we identify them, we are developing a strategy to replace those through competition, or in the case where there are single sole source contracts with a refreshed contract that takes into consideration changes in the marketplace, if it's a volatile commodity, if it's a service that is stale and there's something out in the marketplace that is more effective, or that other jurisdictions have tried, or that research has indicated in some way that leads to an improved outcome, we will consider those. And it is part and parcel of the move of the initiative under Dr. Smith and Mr. Marquez to move from tactical to strategic in our business operations.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is very exciting. I guess, but the short answer to that is that, I mean, if I understand what you're saying, is that you are evaluating those contracts currently, and you will be coming forward, or you will be instituting a policy and an approach to address those in a way that allows us to get best value and maintain strong relationships with our partners.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I should say a little bit more on the question of evergreen contracts. Our general policy is never to recommend that to the board. There are some contracts which in the past have been entered into that are evergreen contracts, and they typically were decentralized contracts, so they pop up by surprise.
Right. I'm sure yeah. I'm sure.
And like we all remember one that was a facilities contract, and we said, where did that come from? Well, it came from, 30 years ago. So we try never to do that. I can't think of any we've recommended in the last 9 years. But virtually there's no reason for an evergreen contract unless you have something like a government-to-government contract for a particular service that you know is going to go on
Well, and
forever.
there may be something unique too, where you have a party that's willing to invest in a structure that has to be amortized over a certain amount of time for it to make sense. So I understand that. I think I appreciate you raising it, because I think, Dr. Smith, the point you raised earlier about some of our actually, Ms. Singer, you may have said this too, that where we have relationships that are so built into the DNA of the organization. And that's really the other part I wanted to better understand, which is, and I'll just use this as an example. I was doing some reading over the weekend, and I was learning a little bit more about Epic. And Epic is our for those who don't know, it's a big software program that we use for the hospital. I did not realize that Epic was also a key litigant to fight collective bargaining, and that surprised me. Then it reminded me that there were some of our contract statements that they didn't want to sign, and that all started to make more sense to me. My only point is that Epic, we've become really reliant on Epic, and all of the software companies and even the hardware companies are rethinking their service models as we speak, so that all of their contracts have service components in them, so that we have long-term relationships with them, that they are looking at how do you make money every year, and we're looking at how to not spend money every year. But the size of these contracts and the role they play in the business we do is so critical that understanding under any circumstance, how is it that we're able to be competitive in negotiations in a meaningful way after that first contract, I think is a very, very significant question. And I know, and I'm really excited to see that you're training around negotiations. I think that is just, to me, I was stunned that we didn't do it. And it's not just us. Most public sectors don't think about that. But it brings me back to this question that I think is worth, it's not deeply reflected in the report, but I think it's really worth us understanding those contracts that are that large and that significant to our operations, and therefore, what does the board and the senior staff need to understand about the impact of those contracts from years to come? Because we are going to have to be thinking critically about how we structure our relationships so that when necessary, we have an out versus what we've dealt with now, which is legacy systems that then we patch together. And some of that's a question of resource, and some of it's just a question of no option. Like we didn't, now maybe sometimes there's nothing we can do about that, but as often as possible, I'd really like to understand what these strategic initiatives are that are going to lead us to having better outcomes for the county long after we're gone. So that's exciting that you're doing that. Thoughts on what I just said?
We are assertively negotiating even those single and sole sources that have been, as you name them, legacies, where we have invested resources and talent and knowledge with certain vendor products. And basically, those partnerships are long-lasting partnerships. But even when there are upgrades or opportunities for additional licenses for software, we're still negotiating aggressively. We look at the marketplace to see what other government agencies have negotiated. We share a great deal of information with other cities, counties, states, school systems, all in the public arena that have similar contracts or contracts for the same services or goods as we purchase. And that's part of the market research initiative and our training. We're focusing our development in that space not only on the central procurement team, but on the contracting staff in all of our county departments because of the decentralized structure that we currently have. It's very important. And so the board and the administration's decision to have that level of review housed centrally in OCCM is very well placed because it is a central point to catch all those and to make sure that as we move forward, we are leveraging our spend, because even if they know they have us, if it's a single or sole source, there's still the opportunity for them to have a long-term contract on the books. And so that is what we use in many instances, as well as the intelligence from other communities that use these goods or services to our county's advantage.
You know, one more piece of information on this topic before I just have two other comments I want to make. I think that one challenge that we have is that some of our partners sign NDAs, not to the total amount of the contract, but to the what's available to them, you know, and I mention this because in a couple of contracts where in a couple of procurements, I had asked staff to go to some fellow agencies to take a look at how they evaluated the cost per unit of service in these more complex, and they were mostly tech companies. It was interesting to me that there were certain information they willingly gave, which is, here's the amount of the contract, because there's nothing you can do about that. But what we bought in the contract was not availed. And there are two places that happens. Mostly it's the tech companies saying, no, this is Joe, what was it they told us? That it was...
proprietary information?
Yeah, blah, 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 when it really isn't. But the proprietary information or that we had other public agencies that did not want to disclose what they received because they were discouraged from doing that through their negotiations because they either thought they negotiated well or my bigger concern is that no one's negotiating well, and that not no one, but that it's really just moving the chess pieces around the board a little bit to make people feel like they got a really good deal, and publicizing those would be problematic for them. So I mention that because I think, one, we need to be mindful of when we fall into it's proprietary, because I think often it isn't. And second, I'm really interested in us making sure that we do not sign anything that doesn't allow us to share information with other public agencies when it's appropriate, because we're wasting public assets, whether they're county assets or state assets or, you know, a city or a school district. And I worry that we don't get pitted against each other for a good deal from X company.
Supervisor Chavez, can I join in on this one before we get to your next one? Just, Dr. Smith, I am remembering, and I can't even remember what it is. My recollection is that we run into the same obstacle on some of the pharmaceutical/healthcare items where we may have a dollar amount, but we're not allowed to share or disclose unit costs because that's deemed proprietary, and frankly because, you know, the vendor, understandably, but to everyone else's detriment, wants to be able to push a higher price wherever they go. Are you remembering the same stuff I'm remembering, or are you thinking, what on earth is he remembering?
No, I think you're right. There are also some situations where we are prohibited. Well, there's law that prevents disclosure of certain information. For example, Medi-Cal contracts. The state prevents you from releasing information about, you know, fee-for-service contracts. Don't ask me why they did it. But we try to avoid any kind of contract where there's so-called trade secrets unless we absolutely have to. And county council is vigorous in arguing with the counsel for the other agency about what can be redacted and what shouldn't be redacted. So probably should let James comment on that.
I was going to say the vigorous county council appears to be leaning in. If you could bear with us for just another moment, Supervisor. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add it's a significant challenge. There are a lot of companies that, you know, there's a trade secret exemption to the Public Records Act, and there are a lot of companies that want to read that as broadly as possible, and we push back very, very, very strongly against that, many rounds, and to the extent that we do agree to redactions, we also require that those companies fully indemnify us in that case. If anybody makes a request, they're going to have to go get the court order to say that, to go court order against us basically to have that information then withheld. So we place that burden then on them. But the county executive is correct. The most common context that it arises is related to the health and hospital system, and it's part of a much larger dynamic in the healthcare sector around unit cost secrecy, frankly. And, you know, we definitely push very strongly on that, but there are limitations to our ability as one county to, you know, change that entire marketplace.
Supervisor Chavez, thank you for letting me weave in some similar concerns. I want to turn back to you.
Thank you. And just a couple things. I wanted to just say well done on the so far saving $10 million with these new approaches over a relatively short time. I think that's wonderful. And I do just want to highlight that one of the things that surprised me when I got here is that we had at least one contract where we were paying a broker a percentage of the total sale of them helping us with a transaction. And I can just see by the look on your face, you understand why that was so shocking to me. And it did occur to me that there are times when it makes sense for us to look at profit sharing when we're asking someone to help us broker significant deals. And I just want to say, I think if you want to be creative about helping us save money and think about new ways to contract, I think that's fabulous. But that was stunning to me. I hadn't, you know, coming out of the, you know, I was in the labor movement. I know what a contract looks like. That was no bueno. Then last thing on the diversity in business programming and vendor outreach, I think this is really an exciting opportunity. I like that we did this with VTA. In some respects, it appears to me that it may make sense for us to look at VTA in the Water District and other kinds of partners that have similar goals as we do to have those shared contracts, because someone who's selling us something is going to try to sell it to VTA and they're going to try to sell it to the water district or the school district. And in some respects, it's, to your point, I think it's making it more possible for people to actually make those applications in a cost-effective manner. and it's really a much better thing for us in terms of negotiating price. And so I'm just really excited about that. I hope we continue that investment, but I want to see if we can root that into partners that frankly have a lot in common with us, like those two agencies.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you all. Supervisor Chavez, a motion to receive the report would be timely. So, motion by Chavez, second by Simidian. Want to confirm with the clerk that we have no public speakers on this item? We do not. Then without objection, the motion is approved. Thank you all very much. That takes us to item number 6, but that item was on consent, so it has already been dealt with. That takes us to item number 7, and this is the surveillance technology use policies. And Supervisor Chavez, I don't know what your level of interest or engagement on this is, but I think I have a way to move us through this relatively expeditiously, but there are issues that I want to surface and come back on. And just a couple of preliminary remarks. I see Mr. Coelho joining us. Mr. Shapiro, if you're in the room, you want to come down? And anyone else who's part of this presentation, and I know we got a number of folks in the room who are resource people, and if you just hang out, we'll let you be resource people in a minute. Before I make some opening comments, however, I do have a card from Susan Bassey, and we'll ask Ms. Bassey to come on down. And as you know, Ms. Bassey, we have 2 minutes set aside for comments on this item.
Thank you. As you know, part of the public and the press for open government, one of the most critical aspects of that is our public records. And you heard our general counsel speak about that a minute ago. I've briefly looked over the report, and frankly, I'm a little bit appalled. You're walking into a giant trap here that is incredibly concerning as a member of the media and as a member of the public. I noticed that there was language change about what shall not be provided under public records. As we are part of Silicon Valley, and clearly we understand the migration from traditional paper records to data, and data exists in all different kinds of manner. And right now the press, we hire data researchers and data miners. We need to be able to access that data. We cannot humanly do it. And on a national level, this is something that is done in our trade. And you are creating records. These are public records. And to have one person decide what is a public record and what is not in this amount of volume of information is highly problematic. The county receives state and federal funding, and if you are not compliant with California Public Records Act or FOIA, you are in jeopardy of losing some of that funding. The other thing that is highly concerning is the issue of how recorders will be used. And I noticed that there is recorders being used in the county counsel's office. These would be records that would be subject to production under subpoena. And these records are going to have a monumental impact on the county financially and have the potential danger to move us to a more secret government in this county. And we're Silicon Valley, and we shouldn't be doing that migration. I think you need more time, thought, more legal advice on this. I think you need to include members of the public and the media on it before you begin to set policy that affects all of us. Thank you.
Let me confirm with the clerk that there are no other speakers on this item. There are not. Supervisor Chavez, I could, on the one hand, on the other hand, instead what I'm going to do is there's good news and there's bad news. And I think, first of all, the good news is that we got a lot of people who bring a lot of expertise to these efforts as we are doing them. Mr. Coelho has been on this task for a while now from the County Counsel's office. Mr. Shapiro, who's here, our Chief Privacy Officer, has been helpful as well. Mr. Marquez has brought some oversight to the effort and guidance to sort of pull it all together. And I think what I have identified, and it's just my take as I've worked closely on this process, is that in the various departments and agencies who've had to come forward with proposed policies, many of them have not really had an opportunity previously to give much thought to the privacy and due process considerations associated with the tools that they use. And that's not a criticism, it's just sort of the nature of mission-driven organizations. If you're a doctor and you're trying to keep people healthy and or save their lives, privacy considerations are probably not top of mind when you walk into the emergency room. If you're a public safety officer and you're trying to keep people safe and you're trying to catch bad guys privacy and due process concerns may not be top of mind. I think that's understandable in any mission-driven organization. So the bad news is I don't think there's been a lot of conversation about many of these issues in many of the departments as people have sort of just gone about their business. The good news is that this exercise, I think it's good news, is that this exercise is fostering those kinds of conversations. And I think that's a healthy thing. Now, the bad news is that means it takes a little longer than we all might hope, even though the good news is that for the most part, the documents themselves are relatively short and not that burdensome. When we first had these conversations, I think people were visualizing 100-page documents of ER-like quality, and really, usually 4 or 5 well-written pages, and sometimes just 2 or 3 will get the job done. So where are we today? Here's where I think we are today. Mr. Marquez, looking to you, and Mr. Marquez and I had a conversation just yesterday. I think we've fallen a little bit behind schedule again. Fair enough. I also think we're struggling, frankly, to post this information for our FGOC meetings on a timely enough basis that public opportunity for review is real. And I know there have been some reasons for that, and I'm not really worried about past tense. I'm more looking forward to just going forward. Let's try and make sure that the information is up and posted so that not only committee members and their staffs have time to review the documents, because as you will soon discover, I've read every word, but also so that members of the public have the opportunity to review. And it's not that I think tens of thousands of good people are out there ready to review these with us, but that's a major part of this effort, is to make sure that our policies are open and public and transparent. What I'm going to suggest is that I march through and offer some questions and comments on I think we have 18 in front of us today. Believe it or not, I think I can do that relatively quickly. See if Supervisor Chavez has any additional questions or comments, and then simply continue these to a subsequent meeting. And then as to the items under item number 8, which follows, continue those as well so we get them on a, quote, new calendar, and that we work with all parties to develop a new calendar. I know my office has been in touch at least with Mr. Marquez about what that might look like. Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Coelho, anything you want to say before I start to just march quickly through with some comments and questions? And Mr. Marquez, excuse me, I didn't mean to, I'm looking forward, not to my right.
I'll just make one comment.
Please.
The ordinance passed just before I came back to the county in August of 2016.
Welcome back.
And what I noticed is, to your point that you made earlier about thinking through the privacy implications of these technologies, the initial task was to identify which policies we had, and that took a lot longer because it forced us to look at that definition and say, well, what are we doing? And it was at that level, and I think we came up with something, I don't know the exact number, 80 or so policies. But even that task in and of itself, to have us give thought to the different technologies that are out there, I think was very helpful. Just
Good.
wanted to add that in.
All right. Mr. Coelho, Mr. Shapiro?
Nothing further to add.
That's working. Yeah, so Mike Shapiro, Chief Privacy Officer. I'll just kind of back up one of the points you made. It has been good as I've gone through some of my privacy reviews. I've actually had people say I hadn't even thought of that before. So it's been a good process, a good dialogue back and forth as we've gone through use policies, and look forward to continue with that.
All right, thank you. I'm going to, just as I say, go through, and I'm not going to ask you to, if there's somebody here who is working on one of these and who can come forward and answer a quick question, or if there's a quick and easy answer, great. But otherwise, I'll just sort of march right through them and tee them up for you, and we can deal with them at some future time. Looking at 7.1, badge password access technology for multifunction printer and copying machines. There may have been a Freudian slip to say malfunction. Badge password access technology for multifunction printer and copying machines. This is 7.1, beginning at packet page 78. It's just a 2-page policy. Under item number 8, and forgive me, I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Item number 8, the first bullet, it says that the agency may provide the data captured by badge and password technology to law enforcement representatives if the agency or department head or designees believe that the information or documentation shows suspicious or illegal activity. And I do want to spend a minute, notwithstanding what I just said, about the word suspicious, because it is used repeatedly and apparently as a term of art in a number of these policies. And I know what illegal activity means, more or less. Do we know what we mean when we say suspicious? Because we say that in probably 2/3 to 3/4 of these. And let me just sort of be direct here. Are two teenagers hanging out in a parking lot after hours suspicious? Are two teenagers of color hanging out in a parking lot after hours going to be deemed suspicious? Does suspicious have a legal meaning, or is it a colloquial term? Because it's used a lot as the basis for handing over information. So I want to know what suspicious means.
I can respond from County Council's perspective in terms of information from departments. It's specifically as it relates to badge readers, for example, since that's the one that you've identified, Supervisor. It may not be illegal to make 750 copies, and the badge data that you're getting showing that I, Rob Coelho, scanned my badge, made 750 copies, it may not be illegal, but that might be unusual or suspicious, and so there may be a belief that it's being used for an improper or unauthorized purpose.
And so let me just ask, as you take yet another look at these, which is what I'm going to be asking for a motion to do in a little bit, that you look at the word suspicious, and if the word suspicious is being used to say indicative of improper or unauthorized use, then maybe you want to say that, because I bet if I went through the room and asked everybody what they thought was suspicious, they'd have a different point of view on what suspicious meant. And I think if you really mean it in that way, then it provides a little more protection and clarity. That's all I'm asking for. Now, since we're talking about printers and copying machines, and this may not surprise you, maybe Supervisor Chavez is more adept with the printer and copying machine in her office than I am. I claim no proficiency whatsoever. But I couldn't help but note under 3, data collection, with respect to copying and scanning. So copying a document, I'm going to call that, take one piece of paper, walk to what I used to call the Xerox machine, and I understand that that's no longer what it is, take it to the Xerox machine and copy it. With respect to copying and scanning, there is generally no stored record of what was copied or imaged. Now, the word generally suggests that sometimes there is. So I'm curious, when is the county keeping a copy or image of something that somebody has walked to the machine and copied? And who has it? And what do they do with it?
I can answer that. Our new copiers have the ability for an individual to email or copy to any copier, so that on your computer you print to a secure IT address, and then use your scanning badge to go to any printer you'd like, and you can print it at that point. When you do that, you have to make a choice of whether you want to save the digital copy or not. Most people erase them, but some keep it, and when you keep it, it's kept in the service or server.
And I understood that as to something that was being printed, meaning that if someone is sitting in their cubicle and they have a document they're preparing and they're going to have it printed out. But what if I literally take this piece of paper and walk to the same machine and all I want is a single copy? I'm trying to discern whether or not the system is copying that document and retaining it somewhere after I've walked away or my staff has walked away with their single sheet that was the copy they thought they were making.
I know that the same functionality is available for scanning that the county executive described.
If you just put it in and say copy, no, it doesn't keep it. But you can, it's possible to email from the computer or from the copier to your computer. But if you just say copy, it doesn't keep it.
Okay. Mr. Coelho, I'm pretty sure this isn't your department, but if I could ask you to get us a clearer answer on that specific issue, which is I wholly take the point from both county council and the county executive, who apparently have been working on other duties as assigned, that if you're scanning or printing from your computer, that there is a potential to save the document. I'm trying to figure out if somebody who walks over and makes a Xerox copy of what they are thinking is a, forgive the old-fashioned reference, making a Xerox copy of what they think is a confidential document, needs to be concerned that image lives on somewhere else in the system. And I'm hearing, don't have to worry about that, but I'd like a little more clarity about that.
Supervisor, I will look into the issue, but I think there's a difference between what the badge scanner technology may be able to do and what the printer itself may be able to do. So I'll try to get you an answer to the question. It's quite clear to me, based on the information I've received, that the badge scanner technology wouldn't track me putting one page on a copy machine and what the content of that copy is, but it may be that the copy machines themselves, in order to create the image, are somehow storing something.
Okay. Then, thank you for that. Then, jumping ahead to the next one, which is 7.3, and the reason that I've moved too forward to go to the next one is because we have red lines for these in between. So the next one is 7.3, packet page 83, computers and mobile phones with audio-visual recording capabilities. Here again, we've got suspicious, again, is used as a kind of a casual term of art, I thought. I think that is the only observation I would have there, except to read out loud from 4-point data access. County employees shall have no expectation of privacy with respect to audio, image, video recordings they have made using county computers and mobile phones. No expectation of privacy. Okay. Then I'm going to jump ahead to 7.5, which is the facility access control technology. And essentially, this is my card access, yes? And just a quick question, and maybe you can tell me, is this RFID technology we're talking about? Or is there a different technology used? Radio frequency identification?
I don't believe it's used for facility access control. It is used, I'm sorry, RFID isn't used, but the badges are basically used to provide access, and then as well as sort of keep track of where people are, not necessarily throughout the building like RFID could actually be used. It's just used to identify where people enter or exit a facility.
Yeah, what I'm used to, which is not necessarily what we're doing, which is why I'm curious and asking, is an RFID technology that essentially has me waving my card because the little green and red lights that are there are saying, "Hi, who are you?" And then my card is telling them who I am based on a unique identifier. And I'm trying to figure out if that's more or less what's happening in this case.
Hi, Supervisor. Jeff Draper with the Facilities and Fleet Department. Yes, it is RFID technology.
Okay, so that's what we're using at this door here.
That's correct.
Okay. And so, again, the word suspicious. And then under data retention, Ms. Draper, you might as well stay because I've got some things. Nice. Appreciate you coming forward, though, seriously. Under data retention, it indicates that as a default, if no specific retention destruction schedule applies, and if the data is not required to be kept longer by law or for a county business-related purpose, the data shall be destroyed no later than 2 years after being collected by the badge access control technology. Is there a reason it has to be 2 years?
There's no, the only thing we thought is if there's any investigation or anything that would follow, there should be an allowance for some retention.
Okay. And I'm going to tee this question up to deliberately put all of us on the spot, not just you. So if I understand it right, the only way to get in this building, I mean, we don't have keys, right? Or do we? I don't have a key.
There are keys.
Okay, good. Good to know. Maybe. So if I... Yeah. Well,
we don't normally issue them out because people lose them. We have to rekey the building.
There you go. Good thought. So in order to get in the building, we need to use our key cards. And if you keep the data for 2 years, that means you have the lawful movements of folks who are not involved in an investigation and who have not engaged in any unlawful activity, documented their comings and goings for 2 years.
Unfortunately, you're right, Supervisor.
For everybody who has a card who comes and goes.
Unfortunately, all the good apples get caught with maybe the 1 or 2 bad ones. Yes, sir.
Okay. I understand the desire to keep the information. for what might be a subsequent investigation. And of course, there's always the debate about, you know, as I say, between 6 months and infinity, there surely must be a reasonable balance, and different people will disagree. Let me just ask that you take a look at whether or not it really needs to be 2 years, because one of the ways to make sure we don't abuse data, and this locational privacy issue is an important privacy because it tells you a lot about where people are, who could be stalked, you know, all those kinds of things. Let me just ask, if you want to come back with 2 years, that somebody come back with some indication that this data has actually been useful after a period of more than 6 months or a year, and make that case. And if somebody came back and said, oh, gee, we solved 6 break-ins in the building because we had this data a year and 8 months later, that would be at least intriguing to me. If somebody came back and said, well, actually in the last 10 years, that hasn't happened once, that would be a different outcome. So just ask you to think about that. And here, as in other places, still under data retention, says the data collected shall be stored for as long as required by law or county policy or as needed for a county business purpose, and then also subject to County Board Policy 3.57. And the 2 gentlemen who are down here were not privy to the conversation I had with Mr. Marquez about the fact that we adopted this data retention policy and record retention policy sometime in the last 5 years. It was focused on one side of the equation, which is hanging on to things that need to be held on to so that people can go back and look. It frankly was not focused particularly on trying to maintain people's privacy. And so when we have this conversation again, if we could bring a copy of Board Policy 3.57 along, post it as part of the enclosure, but also take a look at it and ask, did we balance the two? Because that's really the goal. And you know, there's a competing tension there, obviously, in terms of needing to have the information in the future, but on the other hand, not retaining data that it could be subject to misuse. So thank you for your help on that. That takes us to 7.7, which is security cameras and collected data within the facilities and fleet departments. This raises a question that also runs through a number of the policies. I'm looking at item number 2, authorized and prohibited uses. Video monitoring of public areas shall be limited to uses that do not violate a reasonable expectation of privacy. Later on, it says security cameras shall not be used in areas where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy, such as restrooms. Where else is there a reasonable expectation of privacy? Because we don't really say that in any of the policies. We just say reasonable expectation of policy. Restrooms are called out because I think that's an obvious one to most people. But does that mean pretty much everywhere else there isn't a reasonable expectation of privacy?
I can provide some legal responses based on input that folks provided
Please.
to me. So, for example, we have lactation accommodation rooms where nursing mothers use periodically. We, the DA's office, I believe, just recently added a facility that includes a gym and there's a place to shower. I don't know whether a shower is the same as a restroom or not, but certainly it's another place where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy. So those are just 2 examples within county facilities that have come up as areas where we certainly wouldn't put them, but trying to come up with an exhaustive list of here's where we think you may have one and here's where you think we may not was not an exercise that I endeavored to try to complete in drafting the policies.
Let me ask the question this way then, which is there were a number of places where there was reference to the fact that surveillance devices would be used in, quote, public areas. And that prompts me to ask then, what about an employee's cubicle? So, you know, the floor I know best is the 10th floor because that's where I spend time. Clerk of the board is there. A number of folks are there sitting in their cubicles doing their work. Should they anticipate that they have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their cubicle, understanding that they're opened? Or should they anticipate that if someone made the judgment that for security purposes a camera was up, that their activity in their cubicle would be subject to a surveillance camera?
I don't think we addressed that specifically in this particular policy. However, I would say that typically there is a reasonable expectation of privacy along personal belongings. For instance, your employer can't necessarily search through your personal belongings if they don't feel that there's illegal activity involved. However, when it comes to company, or in this case county property, they certainly have that ability. So, for instance, when we log into our computers, there's a splash screen that says that there is no expectation of privacy. So we do realize that with our our activities online, that can be monitored, as well as anything to do with county property. I don't believe necessarily that there are certain cameras or surveillance that's done on particular cubicles unless there's a reason, because there may be issues with certain employees being treated unfairly versus others. We want to make sure that there's that equitable treatment. So I think going forward, we'll just make sure that we pay attention that if there are certain cases to where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy, if it doesn't meet some of those that County Council has mentioned here, then that's something we could certainly consider as we get these use policies in the door.
Let me just ask you to think about that a little bit more between now and the time we talk about this again. And I'm going to come back to this issue where I can reference it now. In a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about the devices that are on county cars that essentially monitor not only where the car has gone, as I understand it, but how long it stops, where it stops, so on and so forth. Now, I understand to the point that Mr. Shapiro just made that employees understand that when they're using county resources, that there's going to be a certain loss of privacy and that they are county resources. But I'm not sure, and this is one of the, in my judgments, the benefits of having these conversations, that most people come to work every day thinking, all right, there may be a 2-year record of my comings and goings in and out of a building based on my key card, plus there may be copies of documents that I copy on a copying machine, plus there may be a videotaped record of my comings and goings in public spaces, plus there may be a record of my movements while I go about my duties in a county car. That's a lot of data about individuals, which is why, as someone who's concerned about these issues, I think it's helpful to have this larger conversation. Supervisor Chavez, I see you leaning in. I don't want to preclude you from weighing in at a timely moment just because I'm marching through all these. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to make 2 points. I think one, I do think this is really an important conversation, and at some level, it's really worth us thinking about how we have this conversation with our employees. And I'm not even really talking about it from a meet and confer perspective. I really mean it from a, what does it mean to work at this place? I think a lot of private companies really do have very rigorous conversations with their employees based on the type of work they do. So for example, if you're creating software, there's some pretty bright lines about, privacy and information and what can come in and what can come out, and frankly, who can come into your workspace and who can't, and the connection those computers have to other computers. I was just talking to a group of employees earlier today who were talking about HIPAA, and I thought this was really interesting. Actually, I was thinking a little bit about this discussion because the group sort of said, oh, we know we need to protect that data. We want to talk about this other issue. And I thought, well, that's good. Like there's a kind of a general cultural sense that people understand that we need to protect that data. But in any case, I do think it's worth us having a conversation with our employees about that. I just want to put a pin in that because I don't know that anybody thinks about, I think that the cultural norms around privacy are changing so dramatically that we're having a conversation about how we protect people's information, and people are using their phones to buy everything from what they read to what they wear to what they eat to where we travel. And so I don't know if people are consciously thinking about that, but I do think about it as it relates to being an employer of choice. The second point I wanted to raise is it's interesting the point you raised about how long should we keep data. The second part of that is to what end. And so, for example, you raised a really interesting point about the county cars, because in some ways, how people use the automobiles in aggregate is actually really important to other goals we have. For example, climate change, and so at some level, I want us and I'm not sure when the appropriate time to have this conversation is, President Simonian, because I know you've really been leading us in this effort, so I want to defer to you on this. But at some point, we need to have a conversation about when we determine we want to keep aggregate data for the purposes of being better employers, being better citizens, being good on climate change, or whatever those policies are, and the point you raised earlier about do we really need to keep the comings and goings of a particular person for 2 years? But maybe it makes sense that we do keep that data in aggregate for much longer. Just one last thought on this, because just while I was thinking about cameras, is I don't know if you've been over to Burger Drive to look at our, I don't know, maybe Jeff, you can explain it, but it's where we have all of our cameras that look at the expressways. And actually, the resolution in there is very good, which I was reminded of when I was thinking about putting lipstick on at a red light. I was like, no, I'm gonna wait. I see that camera, and but I raise that because we have a lot of data about a lot of people, and again, there in the aggregate there may be value to that we do want to use for public good. About the person, not so much. So, in any case,
just to clarify, Roads and Airports does erase that regularly, so we don't save the traffic data, but they use it. There's a AI component that uses the picture to measure the density of traffic so that the stoplights are changed in order to try to maximize the flow. I did ask them about that.
Thank you. And, I think Supervisor Chavez is spot on about what I'll call the metadata. I'll use the term slightly imprecisely perhaps, or what she's called the aggregate data, which has great utility and importance in terms of, trends and directions for us. And are there ways to capture that information while still being mindful of the sensitivity of PII, personally identifiable information? And I know our team is sensitive to that, but I want to make sure that that's embedded in the privacy policies as well, so that we get the best of both worlds if we possibly can. And I think at this point I should acknowledge that what I thought I could do quickly, I can't, so I'm going to just keep marching on as best I can. 7.9, which is the telematics that I referenced just a minute ago, indicating that the telematics will be used, quote, to determine vehicle speeds, location, routes, usage, idling frequency, and onboard diagnostic information. Is that information, are those telematics being collected on all county cars?
We're currently still installing telematics on some of the older fleet. Every new county vehicle that's been replaced with, I believe, the last 3 years should be carrying telematics on board. The message we try to tell all operators is yes.
Okay. So just to Supervisor Chavez's point earlier about making sure that our employees understand the rules of the road, no pun intended here, that they should understand that their movements are being monitored and that information is kept for some period of time. And to a very specific point, if Paul is using a county car, if somebody wants to go look, we can find out where he went and how long he was there and what speed he went. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Just so he knows, and just so everybody else knows, and then just so we're mindful of the fact that also raises some privacy implications, even as it provides us both with some data that we need, and also even as it provides us with some accountability we'd like to have for the appropriate use of the vehicles, which I get. But I think, as I say, it's quickly becoming apparent how much information we do collect, even if we don't ever put all the pieces together. If you start to connect the dots, you get a pretty complete look at somebody's life in a way that has the potential to be intrusive and used inappropriately. Looking under data retention, this is one where I'll just ask for the answer at the next time. Item 6, packet page 106, page 2 of 3 on the policy. Telematics data shall be retained for the duration of the county's contracts with the telematics vendor, after which it shall be destroyed unless the county contracts to preserve that data. That gives me no assurance whatsoever that there's a reasonable retention period that I could identify. And so when you come back on that one, I'm probably going to ask the question, how long do we keep the data? And I'm going to hope that we get an answer that's clear, because that one makes me nervous. And then once again, we have the word suspicious, which is suspicious to me. Okay, then we're going to go on to 7.11, which is the audiovisual recording devices. Here again, this issue of recording in locations such as restrooms where individuals have a reasonable expectation of privacy. We've had that conversation. I did think it was interesting because this is with the clerk of the board that they talked about retaining information that had archival value, and I thought this policy actually did a pretty nice job of distinguishing between public meetings where we are recording and private conversations where we are not, and things that should be kept. So that was all I had on that one. Then rushing ahead to 7.13, audio recorders. There's a bullet under authorized and prohibited uses where it talks specifically about with written or verbal consent of the interviewee. I think in one of these policies there was actually reference, and I'm looking at the county counsel's office now, Mr. Coyle, to state law that prohibits the recording of a conversation without a person's knowledge and consent. Let me just say that explicitly referencing that in some of these policies might be helpful. So I'll just ask you to think about that. Again, I'm looking at now the top of page 2 of 3 where it says audio recorders shall not be used in areas where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy. I think that's a little different for an audio recorder than it is for a video camera. And so, you know, if there was a video camera right outside here in the lobby, that's one thing, and I don't think that would surprise people. If there were audio recorders that were being used to listen in on people's conversations while they sat and waited, I'm sure we'd all think, wait a minute, I have a reasonable expectation of privacy in a conversation if I'm sitting in a chair next to Supervisor Chavez talking to her. So if I could ask you to think about how that works. Again, the word suspicious being used sort of without a great deal of clarity. Consumer Environmental Protection Agency, digital cameras. Again, the issue of places where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy, and this is obviously a somewhat different issue for this particular department or agency. Again, under retention, I think a little more clarity could be helpful. Looking under data retention, it says retention timelines for stored data shall vary based upon the type of data at issue in accordance with SEPA's record retention and destruction schedule pursuant to County Board Policy 3.57, which begs the question, so what does 3.57 really mean in terms of eliminating the data, not just retaining the data, because that's really what it focuses on. And then let me just ask here, but in other places, might it not be helpful to have a maximum data retention period in the absence of direction to the contrary, so that people know that there is a default of, so here, for example, if somebody said the information won't be held for more than 6 months or a year in the absence of explicit direction, that would give me a little more comfort that stuff wasn't just going to sit around forever because nobody felt they had an obligation to get rid of it. And again, suspicious. Then we get to item 7.17. This is the vector control system campus security cameras. Again, the issue of where is there a reasonable expectation of privacy. Again, here it talks a little bit about using the technology, the security cameras, in areas including but not limited to the lobby, the building entrances, and parking areas. So that leaves me to wonder, again, on this issue of expectation of privacy. If there's a conference room, could there be a camera there? If there's a break room for workers, is there a expectation of privacy there? And let me say, under data access, we start to get to the point where with designees, I'm starting to worry that there are an awful lot of people who suddenly have access. So the data access on page 2 of 3, packet page 141, shall be restricted to the SEPA director, information services manager, or their designees, which means pretty much anybody, for county business purposes, and then SEPA staff at the site with a county business need to access the data, or county staff members designated by the information services manager, SEPA director, or their designees as having a county need, and then other county personnel designated. If I could ask you to look at this designee stuff and see whether or not it's not a little too loose. That's my first question. And the second question is, what does it take to be a designee? If somebody just says, yeah, go ahead, Bob, take a look at that, does that make them officially a designee? And how do we then know that somebody was officially a designee? Should such designations be in writing, even just an email? It takes 10 seconds to do an email saying, Bob, you're authorized to go look at that. But, and then under data retention, this is an issue we've struggled with before, and I'm going to ask you to just sort of be mindful of the drafting here. It says that the information shall be retained for no more than 30 days. So it took the no more than approach. But then in the second paragraph, it says, reasonable effort shall be taken to ensure that recordings are not purged or destroyed before the end of the 30-day period. So one is don't do it before, but don't do it later than. And then it says, and that all records are purged or destroyed as soon as reasonably possible, without any clarity about what that means, upon the expiration. So there was some place, for example, where it said, keep it for at least a year, but get rid of it by 18 months. I thought, okay, now I know what that is. It means keep it for at least a year, but you know, within the next few months, you got to get rid of it. If you could be mindful of that, I would appreciate it. And again, under third-party data sharing, it says that it's going to be limited to so-and-so and only with the consent of the SEPA director or the director's designee, and the designees are almost limitless, so concern there as well. 7.19, 911 audio recording system. Nothing to add. 7.21, public areas again, suspicious activity again, reasonable expectation of privacy again, designation issues again. Liked the fact that it says a written email or letter should be sent to the communications director when law enforcement is making the request, just so we have a written record of it. That's under third-party data sharing, item number 8. Going to 7.23. There's a specific reference to signage, and I think that's a helpful and important issue that is missing from many of the policies, which is questions about reasonable expectation of privacy obviously beg the question, did you tell people that they are under surveillance? Now, I understand there are some isolated cases where you don't want people to know they're under surveillance, but for the most part, when I've talked with staff, they said, you know what, signage is great because then people know that they're being watched and they'll hopefully act better. So if signage is something we would like to encourage, I think putting it in the policies, and I'm a whole lot more comfortable with having a security camera in a common area where everybody knows that by walking in, they're going to be under surveillance, as opposed to having them walk in and not realize that there is surveillance there. So in this one, for example, on packet page 163, there's actually a line that says under 4, data access, and I think it's the only policy where, at least where I remember seeing it, efforts shall be made to keep the total number of designees with access to the video security system as low as possible within the constraints of ensuring coverage by trained staff. I appreciated that, and if we could spread it around to some of the other policies, that's a clear and thoughtful notion that, yes, we're going to allow designees because we need to provide staff with that flexibility, and so the top person in the organization isn't dealing with every need to access the information. On the other hand, some indication that we're going to try and limit that access and not just hand it out like candy would be helpful. Again, the issue of suspicious. 7.25. Drones. This is the Parks and Rec Department. Is somebody here from Parks and Recs who worked on this policy? Could you come forward, please? Thanks. I'm going to ask you a question that I don't want the answer to today, but that I would like to ask today so you can give us the answer the next time, because I know you're looking forward to coming back to FGOC. So you have a drone, it's flying around, it's doing what it's supposed to do. In the course of doing what it's supposed to do, somebody notices an attractive man or woman in their backyard lounging in a bathing suit. The drone captures video of the attractive man or woman in their bathing suit in their backyard. What in the policy keeps folks in your organization from sharing that with other people in large numbers? Don't want the answer today. Just want you to kind of come back and give us a real-world example. Okay? Thanks. Because I'm thinking you have some real potential to be, in the ordinary course of business, intruding on people's privacy quite a bit by my definition of privacy, even though there's no ill intent. Okay? Thank you. That takes us to 7.27, closed-circuit cameras. Again, this issue of public workspaces, and this is for Parks and Rec. I appreciate the use of the word only, and I'm going to come back here on this one. This is the Parks and Rec one. Item 2, law enforcement and security-related cameras and their recording shall be used for only the county-related purposes described in the purpose section above. If we could see the word only a little more in some of these policies, that would be helpful across the board, and I want to underscore that. There was sort of differential use from policy to policy, and I understand we've got different departments working on this, but this is one where if across the board we could be, and I understand some cases you may not want to limit it to things that you haven't yet thought of, but where you can say only, that's helpful. Where you can say no personal or non-county use, I think that's helpful as well. And then again, this issue of designees under data access, Parks Department director, deputy director, or their designees for the county business purposes set forth. There's no limit, there's no number. And then just because I did have to read all these, I think there's a missing TO at the end of the first sentence under item 4 point data access. I think you want it to read to the live video feed or the stored data recording shall be limited to : TO. And again, the issue of suspicious and audio recorders, which is item 7.29. I noticed the phrase with consent of all parties present. I thought that was a helpful phrase. I thought it was very specific about saying, okay, we're not doing that unless we have the consent of all parties present. And then that would take me to 7.31, planning and development surveillance use policy, digital cameras. And again, a clear sentence, digital cameras shall be used for only departmental purposes as set forth. That only is a big help. And that takes us to 7.33, finance agency security cameras. Again, I see the word only. I think that's helpful. I saw a specific sentence here under 2 that says a sign shall be posted on site to indicate the presence of video monitoring. That's helpful to me. I would like to see more of that if we could. And that's all I've got on that one. And I think that takes us to 7.35, which is security cameras for technology services. Again, the word only. And this is the one under data retention. Whether I agree or not with the timing, I thought the structure was helpful. Under data retention, item number 6, and again, this is under 7.35, TSS shall retain the data collected by TSS security cameras for a minimum period of 1 year, but not longer than 18 months. I feel like I know what's happening there. I feel like, okay, if it's month 11, they're still going to have the information. If it's month 19, should be gone. And you're giving them some flexibility, saying, hey, when you can get to it, in there. Now, whether they need 6 months worth of flexibility, I'm not sure, but I'm not inclined to second guess that as much as to point out that I think the structure is a helpful way to proceed, and that is all of them. Thank you for your patience, Supervisor Chavez. I am not being flip when I say, do you have anything you'd like to add? No. Okay. Any questions about any of that?
None from County Council's
All right. I'm going to look to my staff, Mr. Pascal, who's in the audience, and ask that he can Xerox my notes on these on the color copier, which may or may not be keeping extra copies, we'll find out, and share my yellow highlights and my red lines with you in case you find that helpful. And then hopefully by the time we bring these back at the next meeting, we'll have all these issues worked out, only a few questions, and we'll be able to move them forward. I do have a card from Mr. Largent. Would you like to speak on this item number 7, Mr. Largent, before we continue it to a subsequent meeting?
Thank you, everybody. Scott Largent. I just wanted to chime in real quick on the
Please.
the printers that you guys were talking about. Probably about 10 years ago in my electronics business, I started kind of updating a lot of the old printers and the carbon paper and just changing over to the actual slave printers that ran the big reams and everything. No matter what somebody did on our main printer, now we had a lot of different ones on the network, I knew everything that they did. So if you actually photocopied something, not only would you get a copy of it, I sure knew what was going on, and that file was actually backed up onto my network. So the capabilities are there. You can not only, if it's not on a network, you can also just change the settings in the printer. It's very simple to do. So no matter what anybody was doing, I mean, I knew what was up. I also knew when people were going to Kmart.com, when they were shopping and going on Facebook. I mean, I had the ability to block pages, but this stuff's very accessible. Just letting you guys know. So it's not new technology or anything. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that's the last card we have. Oops, wait a minute. No, I believe that's the last card we have on this item. Let me confirm that with the clerk. And looking around, Supervisor Chavez, would you like to move that this be continued and that they come back at the next meeting? Motion, second by Simidian. Without objection, unanimously approved. Thank you all for folks who've been working on this over, I know, a period of some time. That takes us to item number 8, and forgive me, I could have done this earlier and I simply neglected it. Because of the late posting and because we're a little backed up on this one, I'm simply going to ask that we continue these to a date to be determined, which is a little different than a date uncertain, but also not the next meeting because we're going to work that issue through. Supervisor Chavez, you okay with that? Motion by Chavez, second by Simidian. I'm going to say in a minute without objection. Any objection? Any comment on the item? Then so ordered. We'll move that item forward. Thank you again. All right. Mr. Largent, you had asked for time to speak under oral communications, public comment, which is on non-agendized items. That's not an accommodation we can always make, but I believe we can make it today. And so if you'd like to come forward and speak for up to 3 minutes, you may. Again, I just ask you to be mindful of the fact that we won't always be able to accommodate that. Welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. I really do appreciate you doing that, Joe. Yeah, we got a little cockroach problem in the back. I'm not calling anybody a cockroach. You got a couple running around the back there. That's why everybody's kind of getting up and moving. Maybe we need to get an
I'm hoping our surveillance cameras will capture that and that we can put together some metadata that will show us the trends. So
and hopefully those surveillance cameras, that footage doesn't disappear. You know, we want to get that cockroach.
Good. Thank you. Go to it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. I had a visit this afternoon till about 2 o'clock, so I was kind of running a little late, but I do appreciate that, Joe. What I've been figuring out lately in my struggles to be in my daughter's life is I found out all those times that I came, I kind of kept everybody in the loop, but when I'd go to San Jose PD, place a report. When I go to the family violence unit, file another report. I'd go to the DA's office. These were all violations of the orders for me to be able to see my kid. And what I found out after, coming down here and speaking with everybody, that they have never prosecuted somebody over contempt charges as far as civil matters. So everything that I was fighting to do, I found out that they have never prosecuted somebody for that. So what they did is they had me chasing my tail in circles. Now, I wouldn't take no as an answer from anybody, and when they'd say, no, we can't file the report, here's an incident card. I'd just go find another officer and say, look, I need to file a report. When I go to the information desk in there, if they didn't want to do it, I'd find another officer. And I would beg and plead, and it's just kind of a sick joke at the end of the day when I find out that I wasted that much time fighting to be in my daughter's life. It was all rigged for people to go back to court. Now, you guys do realize what it's doing. They want to control the family. Now, if they were to enforce my visitation, then we wouldn't have gotten all these other people involved. So we were burning up county resources, burning up your guys' time, because a lot of you went to back contacting the DA's office, trying to figure out what you could do. It wasted time. They were never going to do anything. They were never going to do anything at the DA's office, never anything at the San Jose Police Department. So they keep throwing you back into court. Well, I keep saying I can't pay into this scam. And why should it be that way? And I think that's just wrong. So I hope sooner or later people will kind of start waking up. The county, I believe, should help people when they're in situations like me. I needed somebody to go to bat for me. I needed legal representation in family court. Now, I know we don't give people lawyers in family court, We should just help people and guide them in the right direction. I was never guided in the right direction. And you guys see me out here. It's like I got a glad bag over my head walking in circles. I was going to every one of these places and not giving up, but it's an absolute failure. We want to have fathers back in their children's lives, and we're not making that happen here. Because if I can't do it, and it took 2 years, most of these other people can't do it. And you guys owe that to my daughter, and you owe it to my ex for the system to work properly. Still to this day, my ex does not believe that I tried to do all this stuff. She just thinks I'm nuts and made it all up. So this whole thing of everything I'm talking about, that you guys are all well aware, you're well aware what doesn't work, what works, she doesn't believe any of it. So now where are we at? Still divide and rule. It's just sad. My daughter deserves better. So thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to item number 9. But before we go to item number 9, Ms. Bassi, I noticed that I overlooked your card on item number 8, which is an item we continued. Would you like to speak to it today, even though the item was continued?
Yes.
All right. Forgive me.
I put my bag up there so the cockroach doesn't lay eggs in it. Joe, I beat up on you a lot, and I'm also going to give you credit for when you do things right. And I appreciate some of your thoughtful comments today in reviewing these privacy laws and issues that we have to contend with as you're implementing more technology in our community. But really, you could entitle this meeting as Big Brother comes to Santa Clara County, but Big Sister doesn't get to see anything. And you don't understand. You're still living in a day where you put a piece of paper in a copier and you have no idea how to make a copy and what's scanning. You live in Silicon Valley and you don't know what people are capable of doing. People just realized what Facebook was capable of keeping on us. We're not ready to do this technology. And we're still a two-party consent state. And that means that if you're recording people when they walk in the door, you're violating their privacy. If I pull out my cell phone and I'm looking at my medical records and you're recording me and you haven't told me that so that I wouldn't pull up my medical records, you've inadvertently pulled up my medical records and you've invaded my privacy and you've violated federal law. Ms. Chavez, you mentioned doing your makeup at a traffic light. Imagine all the things that we do in our course of our employment. And I heard a lot of entitlement about government workers and their privacy, about that we wouldn't have a right to know where the car would go and how long it was gone. And I think we have every right to know that. I have every right to know when Jeff Rosen gets in his car and goes to meet a publisher and tells a publisher who is a competitor of mine why we were not prosecuting a woman that I have been investigating who tried to extort $10 million out of her husband, and he was elderly. We have every right to know that. And we have every right to know that Jeff Rosen told that publisher that no jury would believe her, because I've read the information, and I think a jury would believe her. I think Jeff Rosen is trying to decide what the public should see and what they shouldn't. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now that takes us to item number 9, which is the ESA report. No, excuse me, item number 10, which is the Office of Immigration Relations report. We have already acted on item number 9. So we have somebody here for item number 10 from the Immigrant Relations Office, and we'll ask you to introduce yourself, even though we know who you are. And I have just a couple of quick questions here.
Good afternoon, board members, committee members. My name is Maria Love, manager for the Office of Immigrant Relations. And given the interest of time, I could either go through and provide you with a brief summary of the report, or I can just directly address any questions you may have.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate the courtesy to the committee. I have just a couple of quick questions, then I'll turn to Supervisor Chavez. And we could have just called and asked, but I wanted to ask it in public because I thought the answer might be interesting, which is, when I look at packet page 227, which contains a, excuse me, to me, very interesting chart on table 4, Rapid Response Network in Santa Clara County, and it has 4 quarters of data, including the number of incoming calls to the hotline. And in the first quarter, it was 209. And in the second quarter, it was 208. And then in the third quarter, it jumped to 1,807, which is a 8-fold, 9-fold increase. And then in the fourth quarter plus July, it goes back down to 770. And so as I was scanning in real time, I thought, oh, slow for the word to get out, and then all of a sudden everybody got the word, but then the number went down. So that made me think, did something happen in the third quarter that prompted those calls? I'm guessing it did, and could you tell us what that was?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I actually did check on that with the organizations, and their response was that as they continue to roll this out, they have identified that a number of the calls are not necessarily for providing or letting the network know that there's ICE activity, but they're more because they're requesting information or because they're sort of asking about areas that are outside of that realm. So they have been able to really track those calls more closely and only report on those that are specifically related to ICE activity or individuals asking for an attorney or those kinds of things. So that's why the drop from quarter 3 to quarter 4. So quarter 4 is actually the more accurate number of calls.
Okay. Pleased to see the presentations in my district, of course, as I'm sure we all are, Mountain View and Fremont Union High Schools. If we need more presentations, who should we have people reach out to request those? Do we do that directly?
Yes, they can directly contact our office. We have a main number that we've published both on our website and on our resources, and we'll make sure that one of my staff contacts them directly.
Okay, thank you. And not in the report, but we are hearing, my office tells me, from schools about unaccompanied minors who are arriving and needing, in addition to legal services, some help navigating the requirements for going to school. I'm thinking about things like immunization. Do any of our existing contractors help with that? Would that be a useful place to send them, or should we be sending them somewhere else? We just want to try and be helpful to the folks who are reaching out to us.
Yes, we do have organizations that we're currently funding that work both directly with schools, but more specifically with unaccompanied minors. So I provided your staff with the names and contact information for those particular organizations.
Great, thank you. And then, as you know, both Supervisor Chavez and I think, have talked about what I call the Navigator program. We've got that, I think, off in a couple of places, coming up in yet another. Are they connected with your office? Should we be doing some work to connect them with your office?
Yeah, we actually are connected with our office within the work of the Equity and Social Justice Division and how we are collectively identifying how those navigators can actually help us with our work. So we sort of have begun the process of directly connecting with them.
Good. Well, anything we can do in our offices, please let us know. I think, you know, we put a lot on those navigators because, by definition, we want them to be able to help people make their way through the system, multiple systems, and as well as train others to be navigators themselves. So I think your office can play an important role there, and I want to make sure we don't miss that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Supervisor Chavez, do you?
Part of the reason I was willing to put this on consent is I know that we're going to have a more robust discussion on Tuesday, but just two areas that I just want to highlight. I think one is that I got some good news that I think you probably got today too, from Akemi saying that the city of San Jose was going to contribute $50,000 to the rapid response pool, which I think is really good. I think I, for one, had a concern that we were not getting resources, not just from the city of San Jose, but other cities have this impact, and it's really a public safety issue for each of our communities. So I'll look forward to seeing how that can be more leveraged. I also just wanted to say how much I appreciate that you're going to take a deeper dive into the way these contracts get structured in the first place, because one thing that I think is so fascinating is that, not in a good way, is just that the amount of news and the different directions that are coming from the federal government mean that almost any structure we put in place will be obsolete and then back useful again. Like, there's really no way to sort of keep up with it. So I really am looking forward to your approach. And the one question I have about rapid response is that continuing everybody's contracts at their current level makes a lot of sense to me, but this is an area that we didn't actually fund at quite the same level. Is this something we would put a little more money in sooner rather than later, or would this body of work be aligned with the other redesign that you're looking at with relative to rapid response?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it is such a dynamic situation with what's going on out of Washington, D.C. and the Trump administration. But, you know, certainly we, a part, and this will be a part of the report on Tuesday, is, you know, there's a little bit of extra money that we're thinking could go to further pro bono efforts, but some of that could either be diverted to rapid response if that's going to be necessary, or we could look at some additional resources, and we set some money aside in what we're calling the Reserve for State and Federal Impacts, because, you know, what's happening in our community with respect to immigration clearly is an impact of the federal government and its approach to immigration reform. So we can certainly take a close look at what is the exact, you know, the appropriate level of support needed in rapid response and come up with a plan for that.
Yeah, and I think the approach you're taking is the right one. The reason frankly, the reason I was sort of musing on this one is, like I said, I want to be responsive to the city of San Jose, because I was concerned that they were not being responsive. For this is an opportunity to be responsive. But the second thing, and probably the most important, is that even as we're looking at the redesign, it seems to me that your recommendation that we attach the pro bono work with the rapid response work is really strategic. Like, I think that's the smart thing to do. What I'm wondering is that in the short run, while we're lifting that up, whether or not there's some need for a deeper connection sooner of available legal services, even though we're going to be expanding on them. But I'm looking forward to your thinking on that. And I know you've talked to everyone, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we have a motion to receive the report? Motion by Chavez, second by Semidian. Any objection? Hearing none. Approved. Thank you very much. Now, Supervisor, before we go to item number 11, and I do want to ask folks to come forward, I'm going to suggest, notwithstanding the fact that apparently we have a little bit of flexibility on time, I don't think we're going to have time to give justice to the management audit of fleets and facilities if we take time for both the whistleblower program and concerns about election and voting security and privacy. So what I'd like to suggest is that we let the gentleman in the back go, as delighted as I'm sure they would be to hear about the whistleblower program, that we give them notice right now that we're going to continue that item when we get there. Gentlemen, just wanted to let you know. Okay, sorry for that delay, but at least we won't keep you. That does take us to item number 11, which is the County Council's 24/7 whistleblower program report, although I think I'm actually going to turn to Mr. Marquez to begin. But before I go to Mr. Marquez, we have three speakers, and what I'd like to do is just have them share their thoughts. Ms. Bassi to be followed by Mr. Largent, to be followed by, I believe it's KD Pointer. Is that correct, sir? Yes. Why don't you come on up? Ms. Bassi, Mr. Largent, and Mr. Pointer. We are now at item number 11. This is the whistleblower program.
Thank you. I've asked Colin to hand out packets to all of you, which is a partial response to some of the things that your whistleblower program is dealing with. I have been contacting Mr. Paul Murphy, Mr. Matthew Fisk, and the new person in the whistleblower program, very nice people. I have spent hours and hours with them. I have provided them copious amounts of documents, and nothing has happened. Since 1991, we are aware that there are attorneys, private attorneys, starting with Brad Baugh and Nat Hales, who were engaged in improper activity in our courts, filing false documents, giving false reports, and they did this for a corrupt motive. They did it to steal children and to escalate conflict in a lot of our divorce cases. Parents picketed in the late 1990s, and there were some COMAR protocols for change and things put in place as a Band-Aid. It didn't go away, and Mr. Baugh continued his career, and he continued his career with another woman named Valerie Houghton, who is also an attorney. Valerie Houghton is now being indicted by our local district attorney. And last night I had dinner with some people who are victims of Valerie Houghton, and they described what she has done to her lives, their family's life. And I have met with countless parents that have described what Valerie Houghton has done to their lives. Jeff Rosen's office had a complaint about Valerie Houghton in 2014, and he did nothing. He does nothing with white-collar crime. because he's engaged in it himself. But he does absolutely nothing with white-collar crime, and he has let people steal, rob, rape, and sexually assault people in this county and said it's not his problem, it's not his jurisdiction. These attorneys have done it, he's let them do it, and he doesn't prosecute. That is an abuse of his prosecutorial discretion, and I'm asking this county to start reeling in their district attorney and start addressing the real crime that is occurring to our families every day. You don't need to send lawyers to the border through the Law Foundation to help families. They need your help right here. Thank you.
Mr. Largent.
Hi, good afternoon, Scott Largent. I got to know the whistleblower, Paul's a good guy, and same with Matt. And hi, nice to meet you. I'm Scott, by the way. Welcome to the team. So what I'm, it's a good group of people, and I guess it's kind of the concept of don't shoot the messenger type of thing. What I'm worried about is this kind of mirrors the independent police auditor. Now, I know we don't have oversight in place right now for our sheriff. It's going to kind of roll out here shortly. This is what I'm worried about, because I've been dealing with the IPA over there, and it's an absolute scam, and there's no attorney-client privilege. You go in there and you plead what's happened to you. You go, hey, IA didn't look into this right, this happened, and what you end up doing is you give them all this information, and you think you're talking to the right people that are really going to start paying attention. And with the IPA with the city, they use all the information against you, and they protect the city from liability. And that's what I think the whistleblower program is. I'm sorry, I'm not getting results out of the whistleblower program. I appreciate you guys interacting and talking with me. I'm just worried nothing happens. And I'm worried that people are supplying information and there is no attorney-client privilege. It's like fishing with dynamite. And you know what's going to end up happening is all this information that people supply the whistleblower program is going to land right on James Williams' desk. And it's like he's sitting back there like, right on, just keep bringing all this stuff in. And it just seems like a scam. It seems like it could work properly, but it's not going to. And Susan Bassey right here has brought binders and just information about stuff that's just shocking in police reports. She's scanning things, photocopying things, doing investigations that are blowing my mind. And I'm like, wow, this is really going on. She takes all this stuff and takes the time, resources, her own money, brings it all over to the whistleblower program. Has anything ever been done for her complaints? Has anything been done for my complaints? I'm getting smoke blown at me. And it's two of us that's just happening to. I wish it could work better. Thank you.
Mr. Pointer. Thank you for your patience, sir. I know it's been a long meeting.
No problem. My name is KD Bonjour.
Well, I apologize for missing by a mile.
No problem. And I thank you, Supervisor Smitty and Supervisor Chavez, for listening to me today. I'm here today to notify and put the county on notice. We have an organization in the Valley called the United Veterans Council that puts on the Veterans Day Parade every year. This county has been giving money, large amounts of money, to the United Veterans Council that has had the UVC 501C19 suspended for the last 2 years. Why is the county supporting a 501C19 that's been suspended and giving thousands of dollars every year without thought or reason? You even put it on the county seal is even on all of the documents for the 501C19 that has been suspended. What are you looking at? They started applying the county started giving them money 18 years ago and has never checked the 501C19 status every year. I'd like to have an explanation why the county is wasting money on a 501C19 that is illegal for it to function. Thank you.
Thank you.
And by the way, the president of the 501C19 is the chairman of the Santa Clara County Veterans Commission.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marquez, I believe I turn to you now.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor. And you may recall from our last quarterly report to this committee, we ended with the question of when we were hoping that when we felt we'd get a new whistleblower investigator, and we were hopeful that we'd have a successful recruitment. And I'm very pleased to let you know that we did indeed have a very successful recruitment, and we have with us Heather Aiken. Just briefly, Heather has an immense interest in history, I take it. She has her bachelor's degree in history from Principia College, a master's degree in history, and her PhD in history, both from Purdue University. We were able to take her away and steal her from San Jose State University, where she was conducting investigations against faculty, staff, and students as the Deputy Title IX Coordinator. Prior to that, she was at the University of Oregon doing very similar work, and prior to that was doing similar work also at Purdue University. So again, very pleased to present Ms. Aiken to you as our new whistleblower investigator. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to James Williams to make some comments about a contract that we've been able also to enter into.
So included here, we have our biannual update on the whistleblower program. At the last update, we discussed with the committee that we're in the process of getting our contract underway with intake vendor. I'm pleased to be able to report that the contract has been signed with the vendor, Lighthouse Services Incorporated, and we will be now able to bring that new intake portal up and running, which we think is kind of one of the most critical elements to being able to have a system that will allow both the individuals filing whistleblower complaints to be able to track the status progress of their complaints, but also allow us to change our ability to do reporting and data analysis from the current much more manual process and system. That contract took a while to put into place because of the sensitivity of the services being provided, a lot of back and forth to ensure confidentiality and privacy of the data that's being collected. And so in addition to Steve Mitra from my office, I want to recognize Justin Dietrich and Mike Shapiro for their assistance in that negotiation effort. So we're looking forward to that go live with the new intake process now that we have the contract in place. Otherwise, and before I kind of turn it over to Paul, you know, I think the report largely speaks for itself, which is that we've made some significant progress in closing complaints. 123 complaints closed, many from kind of older periods. We're continuing as with the commitment that we made to go through each of those one by one and do what we could. And in the reporting period, 77 new complaints were received. And we think that significant increase in new complaints is in part a reflection of the activity in promoting the program and increasing visibility, and that'll, we think, increase further as we do outreach associated with the new kind of intake system and portal. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Paul.
Mr. Murphy? Let me first say, having looked at your report, and I know you're a veteran of this organization, you clearly know your audience. Supervisor Chavez, I was struck by the specific reference to the sensitivity and the role the vendor will play in interacting with the public and county employees, and making sure that there was an understanding of the importance of ensuring adequate confidentiality and privacy. That I'm guessing I might have been part of the consideration in that particular phraseology. And then I noticed on packet page 305, Supervisor Chavez, that there's a dashboard which indicates that the presenter knows both members of the committee fairly well. So, Mr. Murphy, with those two acknowledgments, and in all seriousness, I just want to say I did appreciate, Mr. Williams, the sensitivity to being sure that vendors understood the importance of confidentiality and privacy. That's, as you know, sort of a bedrock principle that we're trying to push forward here. So, to you, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Supervisor Smitty. For the record, my name is Paul Murphy. I'm the Whistleblower Program Manager in the Office of the County Counsel. And with me, I have Heather Aiken, as introduced, a whistleblower investigator in the County Executive's Office, as well as Matthew Fisk, the other whistleblower investigator in the County Executive's Office. Much of what I might have said has been said. I guess if I were to say one thing and then take questions given the lateness of the hour, the end of the report includes a paragraph where we underscore the cooperation of the departments throughout the county. And it's true individually that Mike Shapiro and Justin Dietrich were helpful with our contract, But it's also true that we have not faced resistance in our requests for documents or when we begin to conduct investigations in the departments, and I think that speaks well to the county. The dashboard does say there are 190 open complaints. That's quite a few, but we are working those complaints and trying to allocate our time and resources appropriately given the priorities that we place on them.
And the only thing I would say about the closing of complaints is obviously the easy way to close complaints would be to not do anything and close the complaints, and I don't think anybody wants to see that. So while that's a number that I think we have to be mindful of and a concern that I think we share, the right way to resolve that is to do the best we can to close them after getting the job done rather than simply try and make the numbers look good for a dashboard. So thank you for that. And again, I want to underscore the concern about privacy and confidentiality. Just one question. Now that we do have the vendor on board, one of the values of having the vendor and the system in place is that hopefully it will not only help you and your team actually resolve individual whistleblower complaints, but I'm looking forward to being able to get some trend analysis so that we can spot areas, if any, where there's a particular reason for concern. If 98% of the complaints all came from one place, or 92% of the complaints were all about X, Y, Z, I think it's pretty clear personnel issues figuring out. How long, I think you're next scheduled to be with us in February for a report back. Will that give you enough time to develop any trend analysis with a new vendor, or are we going to need to wait a little bit longer than that?
Supervisor, I believe that'll give us 3 months with the new vendor if we are to meet our go live no later than October 1st.
Right.
It will certainly reveal to us what's available in terms of trend analysis, but part of the evaluation of the vendor was their system, their sophistication in doing this kind of work, and the reports that are available easily in a real-time basis based on the information that's in the database system. So we can come back with whatever trend analysis we can muster during that time and let you know.
All right. Well, I guess the best answer we're going to get today is we'll see. But if you can sort of be mindful of that, and again, if there is some trend analysis that can be done at the next meeting, that would be helpful. On the other hand, if the data you've got is too limited to really produce meaningful stuff, don't feel the need to create a trend out of 3 pieces of information. Okay?
Absolutely.
Supervisor Chavez, to you.
Thank you. And thank you all for your good work. And just a couple of just broad questions and then a little bit about next steps. On packet page 301, and this is 5 of 8 of the report, you list out the complaints by departments. I actually thought this was really informative because it's the beginning of sort of understanding where we actually have some training issues and some other kinds of issues that may need to be addressed. But what I'm wondering is, under the following table, the disposition of closed complaints, there were 2 one that's not here that I was curious about, and that is whether or not we refer cases and whether or not that referral is a disposition.
Thank you for the question. We do refer certain complaints, for example, to EOD, and we maintain them in a, quote, pending status. And then at the time that we receive information about the outcome, we would reflect that with text of who conducted the investigation. We also seek, when possible, to help direct people to the most appropriate place to file their complaint. So you might see many that are called not a whistleblower matter or non-county, but in those instances, we also would, if we're able to, if it's not an anonymous complaint that is submitted online, we're able to try and work with the complainant to the extent possible to direct them where else in the county or outside the county that they might best file their complaint.
So part of one of the reasons I'm asking that question is it seems to me that the referral, whether it's on they don't enter our system or it's referred after you do a little more investigation, would be really important to know for a couple of reasons, including refining how we communicate what the purpose of the whistleblower case is. And I also know right now you're just getting everything, like everything that people don't know where it goes, it's coming to you right now. So part of that is just that it's the beginning of a more robust approach to the program. But I would really want to better understand to see what those trends are for external referrals as well. So that's one. And then the second is that on the resolve directly by department, you know, the column I thought that was missing on this, as I was thinking about it, I thought, you know, that's really good. And so then the question I would ask myself is, it was resolved by department because a third party was able to mediate it. It was resolved by the department because the person never really raised it with the department because they were afraid of retribution. It was resolved by the you know, what are the implications of that? And or resolved by the department and the institution of, you know, we're making the following recommendations. And maybe that's a more internal document, Paul, that you all are already using. But it does seem to get to the point that Supervisor Simitian raised about both how we can look at trends, how we can look at training, but the other is just understanding if sometimes that third party is just enough to get people talking. Could you give your thoughts on that?
Sure. Within that categorization, there are probably 2 or 3 types of resolved by department instances. The best one, of course, is where I may have an issue and I may complain directly to the department. And then I may also complain to the whistleblower program. And when we go back to begin our investigation, the department is able to report to us and demonstrate through documentation and other means that they actually received the complaint, maybe did their own investigation, sustained the complaint, disciplinary action was taken, and it's already been resolved by them. That would be one instance. And it might be, as you said, that we ask about the complaint in a department level, and it ends up being resolved, and they might have done it all on their own or not, and we don't seek to differentiate in those instances. But to your point, part of going to the new system is we can really look at the design of the database by which we're collecting information and build an operational definition dictionary, so that if I'm choosing how to categorize the closure of a case, I have 4 choices, and we know exactly what we mean by each of those choices. So we inherited a database when we started with the program a year ago, and we're really excited to work with the vendor who's an expert, a subject matter expert in it, to build categories that will provide the committee and the board and the county with the kind of trend analysis you're speaking of.
So so first of all, thank you. I think this is really important. I think I'll just close with this thought, which is that I do think that a big part of one thing I've learned, and I really learned this mostly in foster care, that the ombudsperson that we had that was working in the social services agency had been getting, collecting data every year, and we started to pull stuff off just as part of the committee to say, oh, this looks like something we could work on. This looks like something we could work on. There was a lot of work that happened between the ombudsperson and the agency that started to improve services. I would also argue that there's a lot that's been undone, in part because of the structure of the way people complain, and the ombudsperson wanting, and I understand this, to have a really good, meaningful relationship with the department, so not wanting to push them too hard on some issues or giving the department a chance to catch up and start to resolve problems. What I want to make sure of is that, just given the vastness of the county that you're operating in, that you best help us understand how you frame an approach long-term, because you won't know this sooner, I don't think too soon. Long-term, what strategies will you need to be able to essentially lessen the number of complaints you get, because we're able to make changes to either conduct or rules or other things that really allow us to create a more harmonious and peaceful relationship. So it's, and being willing to raise a flag fast and hard that gets to the right level of the organization, instead of it kind of stewing at one level where it shouldn't be. So that's just a thought for next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. The only action here is to receive the biennial report, so let me ask if there's a motion to do so. We have a motion by Supervisor Chavez. We have a second by Simitian. Are there any other comments? I don't believe we have any other speaker cards. If not, I do want to ask my staff, if you'll please check with the gentleman who raised the issue about veterans, just to see what the follow-up should be there. so that we can refer him to the right person or persons in the county organization. And then, without objection, motion's approved. Thank you all. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think I got that right. All right, that takes us to item number 15, except that item has been continued to a next meeting. And then that takes us to item number 20, which is the management audit on the Registrar of Voters. And I'm going to ask on that one that we also continue the management audit piece to the next meeting of our board, which was Supervisor Chavez's good idea 2.5 hours ago, which I've now joined in on. So without objection, we'll continue the management audit, but we'll ask you to come forward, because that takes us to item number 21, which is to receive the report from the Office of the County Executive, Chief Information Security Officer, and Registrar of Voters. And I understand this is relating to county election and voting security and privacy. This may, I understand, be relatively brief, because it may generate a need to move into closed session, in which case I'll turn to the County Council and ask him to offer an announcement to that effect in a minute. Mr. Dietrich, anything that you can share with us? And Ms. Boucher, anything you want to share with us, you and your team, about these issues here in open session?
Just as the legislative file states, we've been continuing to have this prioritized in the information security team, and continue to ensure the Register of Voters, all systems related to Register of Voters, are as secure as possible. So we continue on those efforts, and once again prioritize it as pretty much the number one priority for my team to make sure that happens.
Thank you. You know, we got to this, Supervisor Chavez. I know there had been work going on, but in terms of the board engagement, this committee's engagement, a little later than we might have, frankly. And I think we've been able to do a lot of good work on a hurry-up basis, so I want to say thank you to people for that. That being said, as we get closer and closer to November, it's become clearer and clearer to me that this issue is not going to go away. And so what I want to do just now is sort of share with you all that my hope and expectation is that we'll be able to pull something together sometime in early 2019, after we've had a chance to take stock of what happened in November, not just in our jurisdiction, but in other jurisdictions from which we could learn, and then ask ourselves, where are we going forward, so that we're not in a position where we're coming to you and saying, hey, what should we be doing 6 to 8 months before the 2020 election? So just to be continued on that front, but I think we're going to want what I'm going to call a combination after-action report / plans for the future discussion sometime February-ish after the next election, and I think that would be helpful to us all, because as I say, it's very clear this issue's not going away as much as we might wish otherwise. That being said, I believe there are some issues that we probably need to talk about on a confidential basis, consistent with state law and closed session. So let me go to without objection and indicate that we'll without objection, we will consider the report received under 21. There is no objection. Reports received. That takes us to item number 22. Mr. Williams, can I look to you? Yeah, my system went cold all of a sudden.
The committee will meet in closed session to discuss item number 23 as listed on the agenda for the August 23rd, 2018 FGOC meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. The committee is now recessing to closed session. We will return briefly to reconvene an open session just to issue closed session report, if any. At that time, we'll announce any reportable action, if any reportable action was taken in closed session. Thank you all very much. We stand recessed to closed session. Thank you all very much. As indicated in our published agenda, our board has been meeting in closed session to consider item number 23 on our Finance and Government Operations Committee agenda today. We are now reconvening in open session. This is item 24 on our agenda for a closed session report. For that purpose, I will now turn to County Counsel James Williams to provide a report if a report is indeed called for. Mr. Williams.
There were no reportable actions taken at the August 23rd, 2018 Finance and Government Operations Committee closed session meeting. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. That would take us to items 25 and 26 on our consent calendar, but those items were handled earlier on the agenda. That takes us to item number 27, which is to adjourn to the next regular meeting on Thursday, September the 13th, 2018 at 2 p.m., unless there is a special meeting called prior to that date, which I indicated earlier might be the case. I'd also like to indicate, Supervisor, and I'm looking at Ms. Olof here, we continued 2 audit items today. Perhaps as a courtesy to all parties concerned and to make sure we deal with them on a timely basis, we'll put those 2 items first on the next agenda, and I'll look to my staff member to make sure that happens as well. Then, thank you to the clerk of the board. Without objection and hearing none, we are adjourned.